The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Warp drive bends spacetime through controlled matter-antimatter reactions. Transporters convert matter to energy and back again. The Bajoran wormhole connects 2 points in space through a stable subspace corridor maintained by beings existing outside linear time. But what happens when something emerges from that wormhole that operates on entirely different principles? When ships arrive that shouldn't exist, using technology that defies every sensor reading, every theoretical model, every assumption about how faster-than-light travel works. Commander Benjamin Sisko stood on the upper level of Deep Space Nine's Operations Center, watching the main view screen with the focused intensity that had carried him through 3 years of managing the most politically volatile location in the Alpha Quadrant. The Bajoran wormhole had just opened, not unusual in itself. Ships passed through regularly, Starfleet vessels returning from Gamma Quadrant exploration, the occasional freighter taking the shortcut, even Dominion probes testing Federation resolve. But the wormhole wasn't closing. "Major," Sisko said, his voice cutting through the sudden tension on ops. "Report." Major Kira Nerys leaned over the sensor console, her Bajoran earring catching the light as she frowned. "The wormhole's energy signature is fluctuating. I'm reading." "Commander, I'm reading multiple subspace fractures forming inside the event horizon." "The prophets?" Sisko asked. The beings inside the wormhole, worshipped by Bajorans as gods, understood by Starfleet as non-linear entities, had warned him before when danger approached. "Negative." Chief Miles O'Brien's Irish accent thickened slightly, a tell that something had rattled him. "Whatever's happening, it's not coming from the prophets. It's like something's tearing through from the other side. Not from the Gamma Quadrant, from somewhere else entirely." The wormhole's mouth expanded, blue-white energy crackling along its edges. Then, impossibly, it stabilized in a configuration Sisko had never seen. Instead of the smooth, almost organic opening that characterized normal wormhole travel, the aperture looked wounded, fractured, wrong. "Ships emerging," Kira announced. "Multiple contacts. Configuration unknown." The first vessel came through tumbling, its hull scorched and atmosphere venting from a dozen breaches. It was smaller than a Starfleet runabout, maybe 20 meters long, with a distinctive split-hull design that looked more like an Earth fighter jet than a spacecraft. Four angular wings extended from a central fuselage, and as it stabilized, Sisko could see a cockpit canopy and what looked like conventional thrusters, no nacelles, no visible warp coils. "They're in trouble," O'Brien said. "Hailing frequencies open, but they're not responding." "Wait, I'm picking up a distress signal. Audio only, encrypted, but the computer's breaking it through." "It's English." "On speakers," Sisko ordered. Static burst through ops, then a human voice, strained and desperate. "Beta 7 to any Earth Force vessels, we are declaring an emergency. Jump engines are offline, I repeat, jump engines are offline. Multiple casualties. Requesting immediate assistance. Earth Force." Lieutenant Commander Jadzia Dax looked up from the science station, her trill spots wrinkling with confusion. "Benjamin, that designation doesn't match any Starfleet." The wormhole flared again. A second ship emerged, this one massive, easily 2 kilometers long, its hull a pale gray-blue that seemed to shimmer under Deep Space Nine's external lights. The design was utterly alien, a forward section that looked almost like a crustacean's head, with a long, graceful body extending behind it. No obvious weapons ports, no recognizable propulsion system, just that strange, organic-looking hull that seemed to ripple as if breathing. "That's not Dominion," Odo said flatly. The station's head of security had joined them on ops, his shapeshifter's instincts already on high alert. "I've never seen anything like it." "Sir, that second ship just powered weapons," Kira warned. "At least, I think they're weapons. Energy signatures are unlike anything in our database." Sisko's jaw tightened. "Red alert. Shields up." hail both vessels. The wormhole convulsed. A third ship exploded through, this one damaged worse than the fighter, trailing debris and what looked like bodies in primitive spacesuits. It was bulkier, more aggressive in design, with heavy armor plating and massive gun emplacements studding its hull. Before Sisko could give orders, it fired. Not at Deep Space Nine. At the second ship. Brilliant orange energy lanced across space, slamming into the graceful vessel's forward section. The larger ship didn't even flinch. It rotated with impossible fluidity, and a beam of golden light, not a phaser, not a disruptor, something else, carved through the attacking vessel's starboard side. "They're fighting," Dax said unnecessarily. "Get between them," Sisko snapped. "O'Brien, broadcast on all frequencies, all known languages. Tell them they're in Federation space and this is a no-fire zone." "Already doing it, sir, but..." The wormhole erupted. Not opened, erupted. Energy discharge so massive that DS9's shields flared automatically, and for a moment Sisko thought the station itself might be pulled into the maelstrom. When the light cleared, 6 more ships floated in Bajoran space. 2 more fighters, a vessel that looked like a massive rotating cylinder, something that resembled a cruise ship designed by someone who'd never heard of aerodynamics, and 2 ships that made Sisko's blood run cold. One was obsidian black, its hull composed of angles and spines that hurt to look at directly. It seemed to phase in and out of normal space, flickering like a badly tuned hologram. The other was worse. It had no clear shape, organic and technological at once, covered in what looked like insect carapace or exposed muscle tissue. As Sisko watched, it extended tendrils of black energy toward the nearest fighter. "Sisko to all hands," the commander said, his voice carrying across the station's comm system. "Battle stations. This is not a drill. Major, get our runabouts out there. I want tractor beams on those damaged ships before they collide with the station or each other. Dax, full sensor analysis on every contact. I want to know what we're dealing with." "Benjamin," Dax said quietly, her centuries of experience as a joined trill lending weight to her words. "I don't think we're dealing with ships from our universe at all. The quantum signatures are wrong. These vessels, they're not supposed to exist here." The fighter pilot's voice crackled again through the static. "Anyone, please respond. This is Lieutenant Commander Jeffrey Sinclair, Earth Alliance, serial number." "Earth Alliance?" Kira looked at Sisko. "Commander, there's no such organization in Federation records." Sisko stared at the viewscreen, where impossible ships from an impossible place were already preparing for another round of combat. Whatever had just come through the Bajoran wormhole, it wasn't Dominion. It wasn't from the Gamma Quadrant. It might not even be from their reality. "Get me a channel to Starfleet Command," Sisko said. "And someone find out if Captain Sheridan means anything to anyone in this quadrant. Because I have a feeling we're about to discover that Earth's history is more complicated than we thought." The wormhole finally collapsed, sealing shut with a shudder that every sensitive on the station felt in their bones. Whatever had opened that dimensional door, it had just closed behind these refugees. The question was whether they were victims or invasion force, and whether Deep Space Nine would survive finding out. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. The Defiance bridge was cramped even under normal circumstances. With half the senior staff crowded around tactical stations and viewscreens displaying 6 different unknown vessel configurations, it felt positively claustrophobic. Sisko had transferred command to the warship within minutes of the incursion. DS9 was a stationary target, and whatever political nightmare was unfolding in Bajoran space, he needed mobility. "The fighters have stopped broadcasting," Kira reported from Tactical. "Life support is failing on 2 of them. The third is trying to maneuver toward the cylindrical station, but their propulsion system is barely functional." Sisko nodded toward Dax at the helm. "Tractor beam. Bring them into our shuttle bay. Carefully, I don't want to damage them further, and I don't want to give them any reason to think we're hostile. Aye, sir. Dax's hands moved across her console with practiced ease. Benjamin, you should see this. Their power systems are generating energy signatures I've never encountered. It's not matter-antimatter, not fusion, not even plasma-based like Romulan technology. It's like they're using controlled nuclear reactions but with some kind of magnetic confinement I can't identify. Can you identify anything about these ships? Sisko asked. Dr. Julian Bashir, who'd insisted on joining them in case medical assistance was needed, leaned over Dax's shoulder. The life signs are human. Definitely human, 2 heartbeats, standard respiration, brain wave patterns consistent with Homo sapiens. But their equipment. He gestured at the bioreadouts. They're not using communicators. Those are actual radio transmissions. And their spacesuits are mechanical, not force field assisted. They're using technology we abandoned 200 years ago, O'Brien muttered from the engineering station. Except they're also using it to travel faster than light somehow. That jump drive they mentioned, I'm scanning the ships, and there's a gravitic distortion generator that looks like it's designed to open some kind of artificial wormhole. But without the exotic matter we use for stable wormhole generation. Worf's deep voice rumbled from the weapons console. The larger vessels have powered down their weapons, but they have not withdrawn. They are maintaining combat-ready postures. Klingon would interpret this as preparation for ambush. So would I, Odo said. The changeling had materialized on the bridge moments ago, flowing up through the deck grating in that disconcerting way of his. Commander, I've completed my analysis of the station fragment. It's definitely artificial, a section of a much larger rotating habitat. Babylon 5, according to the hull markings. Earth Alliance Registry. Built in the year 2257. Sisko's head snapped around. 2257. That's 116 years ago. Or, Dax said slowly, it's from now, in a parallel timeline where Earth's history diverged from ours sometime before first contact with Vulcans. The implications settled over the bridge like a shroud. A parallel Earth. One that had developed space travel, built massive stations, encountered alien species, but without the Federation, without the guidance of Vulcan logic, without 2 centuries of post-scarcity utopian development. The 2 larger vessels are moving, Kira announced. The graceful one is approaching us. The aggressive one is positioning between us and the station fragment. On the main view screen, the pale ship grew larger. Up close, its organic nature became even more apparent. The hull wasn't plated, it was grown, with subtle variations in texture and color that suggested biological processes rather than industrial manufacturing. A single opening appeared in its forward section, too perfectly circular to be a weapons port. Light emerged. Not a weapons beam, not a tractor field, pure, golden illumination that washed over the Defiant's hull. Sisko felt it even through the shields, a sensation like being observed by something vast and ancient. Sir, they're scanning us, O'Brien said, his voice tight. But it's not electromagnetic, not subspace, not any kind of energy I can measure. It's like they're looking at us. Directly at us. They're telepathic, Bashir whispered. That ship is telepathic. I'm reading neurological responses from every crew member, elevated serotonin, increased activity in the temporal and frontal lobes. It's inducing a state of... I don't know how to describe it. Contemplation. Judgment. The light withdrew. The opening sealed. And a voice spoke directly into Sisko's mind, not through his comm badge, not over ship's comm, but inside his consciousness with the weight of absolute certainty. You are not ready. Asterisk. Sisko staggered, gripping the command chair. Around him, the crew reacted similarly, Kira gasping, Worf reaching for his phaser, Dax's eyes going wide with something between fear and wonder. What the hell was that? O'Brien demanded. "A Vorlon," said a new voice. Everyone turned. On the view screen, replacing the image of the alien vessel, was a human face. Male, middle-aged, with the kind of weathered features that spoke of too many battles and not enough sleep. He wore a uniform Sisko didn't recognize. High collar, dark blue with gold trim, military but not Starfleet. "I'm Captain John Sheridan, Earth Alliance Starship Agamemnon. And I'm guessing by your confused expressions that you've never heard of the Vorlons, the Shadows, or the fact that your wormhole just pulled half a dozen ships out of hyperspace and deposited us in what appears to be an entirely different dimension." Sisko straightened, falling back on decades of Starfleet training. "I'm Commander Benjamin Sisko, United Federation of Planets, Deep Space Nine. Captain Sheridan, you're in Federation space, specifically Bajoran space, and I need you to stand down your vessels immediately. We can discuss dimensional displacement after we've established that nobody's going to start shooting." Sheridan's laugh was bitter. "Stand down. Commander, I've got a Minbari war cruiser, a Narn heavy cruiser, and a Centauri battleship all in the same sector, plus what looks like a shadow vessel phasing in and out of your reality. If I stand down, one of those factions is going to blow the others out of space, and your station will be caught in the crossfire." "The Minbari?" Dax asked. Sheridan gestured off-screen. "The pretty ship that just telepathically judged all of you. They're allies, mostly. The Narn are victims of Centauri occupation who just won their freedom back. The Centauri are an empire in decline who use mass drivers to bomb civilian populations. And the Shadows." His expression darkened. "The Shadows are older than your species, older than mine, and they believe evolution only happens through conflict. Chaos is their philosophy, and they're very, very good at spreading it." "Captain," Sisko said carefully, "I understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but in Federation space, we resolve conflicts through diplomacy, not." The view screen flared red. Alarms shrieked across the Defiance bridge. "The Centauri ship is firing." Kira shouted. "Target is the Narn vessel. Mass driver projectiles, kinetic bombardment, impact in 8 seconds." Sheridan's face filled with desperate urgency. "Commander, you have to understand something about where we come from. We don't have your technology. We don't have ships that can go faster than light without jump gates. We don't have weapons that stun people instead of killing them. Where we're from, war isn't something you prevent with speeches, it's something you survive if you're lucky and ruthless enough. The Narn ship's weapons charged, brilliant orange energy crackling along its hull. And right now," Sheridan finished, "you're about to learn that lesson the hard way." The first mass driver round slammed into the Narn vessel's starboard side, punching through shields that weren't designed for solid projectile impacts. Atmosphere vented. Secondary explosions rippled along the hull. And the Narn captain, whoever they were, made the decision countless oppressed people had made throughout history when faced with their oppressors. They fired back. Not at the Centauri ship. At the station fragment. At Babylon 5 itself, the neutral ground, the place where their people had once sought peace. Because if they were dying here, in this strange new universe, they'd make sure the Centauri died too. Sisko's voice cut through the chaos. "All ships, evasive maneuvers. Target those projectiles, full phaser spread. Worf, you are authorized to fire." The Defiance pulse phasers lit up Bajoran space, intercepting mass driver rounds and plasma bolts with surgical precision. But there were too many trajectories, too many ships, too much ancient hatred boiling over in a place that had no context for it. And somewhere in the darkness between the battling vessels, the shadow ship watched. Patient. Pleased. Chaos had arrived in the ordered universe of the Federation. And it was hungry. The Defiance shields flared white-hot as a stray plasma bolt caught their port nacelle. Sisko gripped his chair, watching the tactical display dissolve into chaos. 3 more Centauri projectiles were inbound toward the Babylon 5 fragment, where sensors showed over 200 life signs, humans, aliens, civilians who had no business being caught in a war they hadn't started. Torpedoes, full spread, Sisko ordered. Target those mass drivers. I want them vaporized before they reach that station. Firing, Worf said, and quantum torpedoes streaked across the view screen, each one finding its mark with Klingon precision. The heavy projectiles exploded in brilliant flashes, but 2 more had already launched from the Centauri vessel. They're accelerating their rate of fire, Kira warned. That ship has multiple launch tubes. They can sustain bombardment for hours. Dax's hands flew across her console. Benjamin, the Narn ship is charging for another salvo. Their weapons are gravitic-based, they're creating localized singularities and projecting them. It's crude compared to our technology, but effective. How crude? O'Brien asked. Crude enough that if one of those singularities destabilizes near DS9, it could collapse half the station's superstructure. Sisko's jaw tightened. Hail all vessels. All frequencies, all known languages. Tell them. Commander, Odo interrupted, pointing at the view screen. The Minbari ship is moving. The graceful vessel had been motionless throughout the firefight, observing with that unnerving stillness that suggested absolute confidence. Now it rotated, presenting its ventral surface to the battling ships. The hull rippled, and dozens of openings appeared, not weapons ports, something else. Something that made the hair on the back of Sisko's neck stand up. Golden light erupted from every opening simultaneously. Not beams, not projectiles, a wave of energy that washed over every ship in the combat zone. The Defiance shields screamed in protest, then stabilized. The Centauri projectiles froze mid-flight, suspended in some kind of gravitic field. The Narn's charging weapons discharged harmlessly into space. And every system on every ship, Federation, Earth Alliance, Narn, Centauri, went dark. Report. Sisko barked. We're dead in the water, O'Brien said, disbelief coloring his voice. Main power offline, backup power offline, even the emergency batteries are showing zero charge. It's like every energy system just stopped. Life support? Bashir asked urgently. Mechanical backups are functioning. We've got air, heat, basic systems. But propulsion, weapons, shields, everything's gone. On the view screen, the Minbari vessel glowed with that golden radiance, completely unaffected by whatever had just crippled everyone else. A new opening appeared in its hull, larger this time, clearly designed for small craft. A moment later, a shuttle emerged. Not a sleek Starfleet runabout or a boxy Earth Alliance transport, but something that looked like a teardrop carved from pearl, moving with the same organic grace as its mothership. They're approaching, Kira said, reading off what few passive sensors still functioned. Looks like they want to dock. Do we have a choice? Sisko asked. Odo's expression was grim. Not unless you want to repel boarders with hand phasers. Sisko stood, straightening his uniform. Whatever was about to happen, he'd face it as a Starfleet officer, with dignity and the hope that first contact protocols still meant something, even when first contact came from another dimension entirely. Kira, Worf, Odo, with me. Dax, you have the bridge. If they try anything hostile, I want you to find a way to restore power and get us clear. Use the old Cardassian backup systems if you have to. I know O'Brien keeps them functional despite Starfleet's recommendations. Aye, sir, Dax said, though her tone suggested she thought his chances of surviving a Minbari boarding were not optimal. The airlock cycled with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Sisko stood in the corridor, flanked by Kira and Worf, with Odo positioned slightly behind in case his shape-shifting abilities became necessary. The inner door opened. 2 figures stepped through. The first was female, humanoid, with a bone crest extending from her forehead back over her skull like a crown. Her skin was pale, her eyes dark and infinitely deep, and she wore robes that seemed to shimmer between gray and gold depending on the angle of the light. She moved with the careful precision of a martial artist, every gesture controlled, every breath measured. The second was male, human, young, wearing the same Earth Alliance uniform Sheridan had displayed. But his eyes held something different from the captain's weary pragmatism. This man looked like he'd seen the face of God and wasn't sure whether to worship or run. "I am Delenn of the Minbari," the female said, her voice carrying the musical quality of someone who'd learned English as a second language but mastered its nuances. "Of the religious caste, and a member of the Grey Council. This is Ambassador Jeffrey Sinclair, human liaison to the Minbari Federation." Sisko nodded. "Commander Benjamin Sisko, United Federation of Planets. I'd welcome you properly, but your ship just disabled mine, along with every other vessel in this sector. I'm hoping there's a good explanation." Delenn's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested approval. "You are direct. Good. We do not have time for the elaborate courtesies. The shadows are here, in your space, and they are already beginning their work." "The shadows," Sisko repeated. Captain Sheridan mentioned them. He said they're older than humanity, that they thrive on chaos. "The shadows are the oldest of the first ones," Sinclair said, his voice carrying the flat effect of someone delivering a briefing on horrors he'd witnessed personally. "A billion years ago, they and the Vorlons fought a war that nearly destroyed the galaxy. The Vorlons believe in order, in guiding younger races toward enlightenment through control. The shadows believe in evolution through conflict, in forcing species to grow stronger by pitting them against each other. Both philosophies," Delenn continued, "are flawed. Both treat younger races as children to be molded rather than equals to be respected. But the shadows are more immediately dangerous because their methods involve encouraging war, paranoia, and the worst impulses of every species they encounter." Kira's hand moved unconsciously toward her phaser. "You're saying that ship out there, the black one that keeps phasing, is deliberately trying to make us fight each other?" "Not trying," Sinclair said. "Succeeding. The Centauri and Narn have been enemies for decades. Putting them in the same sector without warning is like throwing a match into plasma coolant. And that's exactly what the shadows want. They feed on chaos. They grow stronger when civilizations tear themselves apart." Worf's growl was low and threatening. "If these shadows are so dangerous, why did your people not destroy them when you had the chance?" Delenn met his gaze without flinching. "Because, Commander Worf, yes, we know your name, we scanned your vessel's databases during our initial contact, destroying them would require becoming like them. The Vorlons learned this lesson during the first Shadow War. You cannot defeat chaos by embracing it. You can only counter it with unity, cooperation, and the willingness to stand together despite differences. Which is why," Sinclair added, "we disabled every ship in this sector." The Narn and Centauri were seconds away from mutual annihilation. The shadow vessel was already extending its influence, probably telepathically, amplifying existing hatreds. We had to stop the cycle before it consumed everyone. Sisko processed this, his strategic mind racing through implications. "You're asking us to trust you. To believe that you're the good guys in a dimensional conflict we don't understand, involving species we've never encountered, using technology that shouldn't exist." "No," Delenn said quietly. "I am asking you to verify our claims with your own observations. Release Captain Sheridan from your custody. Speak with the Narn captain, Kar. Speak with the Centauri diplomat, Londo Mollari. Hear their histories, understand their grievances, and then decide whether the Shadow's presence represents a threat to your Federation. And if we decide you're wrong?" Odo asked. "If we decide this whole situation is an elaborate deception?" Delenn's hand moved to a device at her belt. "Not threateningly, just acknowledging its presence. Then we will restore power to all vessels, return to our damaged station fragment, and attempt to find our own way home. But before we do, I ask you one question, Commander Sisko, how many wars has your Federation fought in the past 5 years? Sisko's expression hardened. The Dominion War is ongoing. We've lost thousands of ships, millions of lives. And before that? Sinclair pressed. The Borg? The Cardassian conflicts? The Klingon Civil War? Your point? Kira demanded. My point, Delenn said, is that even in your enlightened Federation, with your post-scarcity economics and your diplomatic corps and your prime directive, you still find yourselves at war. Again and again. Why do you think that is? The question hung in the corridor like an accusation. Because, came a new voice, old and weary and laced with bitter humor, some species are simply better at hating than loving. Everyone turned. A third figure had entered through the Minbari shuttle, not through the airlock, through it, walking through solid bulkhead as if it didn't exist. Tall, wrapped in an encounter suit that looked like something from a nightmare, with a face hidden behind layers of breathing apparatus and glowing optical sensors. A Vorlon, Sinclair whispered. The being stopped, regarding Sisko with eyes that had witnessed the birth of galaxies. The question, the Vorlon said, its voice resonating with harmonics that made every surface vibrate, is not whether you will believe us. The question is whether you are ready to face what comes next. And what comes next? Sisko asked. The Vorlon tilted its head, a gesture that might have been amusement or pity. Understanding. The Defiance conference room had never felt smaller. Sisko sat at the head of the table, flanked by Kira and Worf, while Delenn and Sinclair occupied the opposite end. The Vorlon, it had identified itself only as Kosh, offering no further explanation, stood in the corner like a monument to secrets older than human civilization. Odo had positioned himself near the door, his distrust of the newcomers evident in every rigid line of his humanoid form. Power had been restored to the Defiant 10 minutes ago, along with every other ship in the sector. The Minbari had simply released them. No demands, no conditions, just a demonstration of overwhelming technological superiority followed by a gesture of goodwill that Sisko found simultaneously reassuring and deeply unsettling. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Sisko said, reviewing the data pad Delenn had provided. In your universe, Earth encountered multiple alien species without any Vulcan first contact. No guidance, no technological uplift, no philosophical framework for post-scarcity society. Humanity had to build its own interstellar civilization from scratch. That's correct, Sinclair confirmed. First contact was the Centauri, in 2156. They sold us jump gate technology in exchange for trade agreements. Suddenly we had faster-than-light travel, but we were still very much a fractured, struggling species. No world government, no united vision, just nation-states trying to survive in a galaxy full of older, more powerful civilizations. Kira leaned forward. And the Minbari? When did you meet them? Delenn's expression grew somber. 2245, it was, not a peaceful first contact. Through a series of tragic misunderstandings and cultural miscommunications, war began. The Earth-Minbari War lasted 3 years and nearly resulted in the extinction of humanity. Nearly? Worf asked, his Klingon sensibilities perked by the mention of honorable combat. We stopped, Delenn said simply. At the Battle of the Line, when human defeat was inevitable and Earth itself was hours from bombardment, our Grey Council made a discovery that changed everything. We learned that humans and Minbari share something fundamental, something that suggested our species are connected in ways we still do not fully understand. We surrendered, turned our ships around, and have sought peace ever since. Sisko studied her face, looking for deception and finding only sincerity edged with ancient guilt. What did you discover? That is not relevant to your current situation, Delenn said, and the finality in her tone suggested the subject was closed. Odo shifted his weight. Commander, with your permission, I'd like to address the elephant in the room, or rather, the alien in the corner. Kosh, you've been silent since making your cryptic pronouncement. Perhaps you'd like to explain what understanding means in practical terms. The Vorlon turned its glowing optical sensors toward Odo. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Kosh spoke, and the words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. You are young. I'm over 200 years old, Odo said, irritation creeping into his voice. Young, Kosh repeated. The Founders. The Dominion. Children playing with power they do not comprehend. Sisko's blood went cold. How do you know about the Founders? I know many things. The Federation. The Borg. The Q. All young, all believing themselves significant. The Vorlon moved closer, its encounter suit making no sound against the deck plating. The shadows are old. Older than your prophets. Older than your first Federation. They have ended civilizations while your species still crawled in oceans. Then why are they here? Kira demanded. If they're so ancient and powerful, why follow a bunch of displaced ships into our universe? Sinclair answered, because the shadows don't need a reason beyond opportunity. They see a new galaxy, new species, new conflicts to exploit. To them, this is a fresh garden to plant seeds of chaos in. Worf's hand moved to the batleth mounted on the wall behind him, not threatening, just seeking the comfort of a weapon in the face of an enemy he didn't understand. Then we destroy them. The Defiant is a warship. We have quantum torpedoes, ablative armor, weapons specifically designed to fight the Borg. Whatever advantages these shadows possess, they can be overcome through superior firepower and tactical planning. No, Delenn said, and the single word carried the weight of bitter experience. They cannot. Not by one ship, not by 100. The shadows are masters of psychological warfare as much as physical combat. They infiltrate governments, manipulate leaders, turn allies into enemies. By the time you realize they've corrupted your institutions, the damage is already done. The conference room's comm system chirped. Dax to Sisko. Go ahead, old man. Benjamin, we've got a situation. The Narn ship is hailing us. Their captain wants to speak with you directly. He says. Dax paused, choosing her words carefully. He says the Centauri have been broadcasting propaganda about Narn war crimes, and he's demanding we turn over any Centauri citizens for immediate trial. He's threatening to open fire on the Babylon 5 fragment if we don't comply. Sisko stood. Tell him I'm on my way to the bridge. And someone get Captain Sheridan on subspace, I want to know exactly what kind of political powder keg we're sitting on. Commander, Delenn said, rising as well. I request permission to accompany you. Carr is passionate. But he is also honorable. If he understands that you are trying to help, not hinder, he may listen. And if he doesn't? Delenn's smile was sad. Then you will learn what it means to be caught between two species who have spent a century perfecting the art of hating each other. The view screen on the Defiance bridge displayed a face that could only be described as reptilian, red skin, prominent ridges, eyes that burned with the intensity of someone who'd seen too much suffering and refused to look away. Carr, captain of the Narn warship Tak, wore his anger like armor. Federation, he said, testing the word. Another human government, I assume. Another group of primates who think their recent mastery of faster-than-light travel makes them qualified to dictate terms to species with 10,000 years of recorded history. Captain Carr, Sisko said, keeping his voice level and respectful. I understand you've been through a traumatic experience. But threatening civilian targets is not the action of an honorable warrior. Carr's laugh was harsh. Honor? You speak to me of honor? The Centauri occupied my world for 100 years. They strip-mined our resources, enslaved our people, bombed our cities when we dared to resist. And when we finally won our freedom, when we finally drove them from Narn, they pretended to be victims. They told the galaxy that we were the aggressors, that our liberation was terrorism. The Centauri version of events differs substantially, came a new voice, smooth and aristocratic. A second window appeared on the view screen, showing a human, or near human, with elaborate hair and clothing that screamed decadent nobility. I am Londo Mollari, ambassador of the Centauri Republic. And while Captain Carr is very skilled at playing the victim, he conveniently forgets that Narn forces have committed atrocities of their own. Raids on Centauri colonies, summary executions of prisoners, religious purges. Lies. Carr roared. Everything you built on the backs of slave labor. Every monument, every achievement, purchased with Narn blood. Gentlemen, Sisko interrupted, his command voice cutting through the escalating argument. This is neither the time nor the place for historical debates. You are in Federation space, and while you're here, you will abide by our laws. That means no attacks on civilian targets, no summary executions, and no continuation of whatever conflict brought you here. The Federation, he said carefully, is founded on principles of justice, equality, and the rule of law. We don't take sides in conflicts we don't understand. But we also don't allow genocide, terrorism, or acts of war within our borders. Then you are fools, Carr said bluntly. In this universe of yours, with your post-scarcity paradise and your high-minded ideals, perhaps you can afford such luxuries. But where we come from, neutrality is just another word for cowardice. Where you come from, Worf said, stepping into frame, is irrelevant. You are here now. And here, we do not settle disputes through bombardment. We settle them through negotiation, mediation, and if necessary, arbitration by neutral parties. Carr studied Worf, seemed to recognize something in the Klingon's bearing. You are a warrior. I can see it in your eyes. Tell me, warrior, if your people had been enslaved, your cities burned, your children sold into servitude, would you negotiate? Or would you make your enemies pay for every drop of blood spilled? Worf's silence was answer enough. Londo chuckled, a sound without humor. You see, Commander Sisko. Even your own officers understand. Some hatreds are older than reason, deeper than diplomacy. The Narn and Centauri will never be at peace. Not in our universe, not in yours. Then maybe, Dax said quietly, you're in the wrong universe. Everyone turned to look at her. She continued, her centuries of trill wisdom evident in every word, you came here through a dimensional rift. None of you chose this. None of you want to be here. So instead of continuing your war in our space, why not work together to find a way home? Because I guarantee you, Commander Sisko is not going to let you turn the Bajoran system into a war zone. Carr's expression softened, just slightly. A reasonable suggestion. But it assumes the Centauri can be trusted to cooperate rather than sabotage our efforts. And it assumes, Londo countered, that the Narn won't use any technology we share to build weapons for future attacks. Both of you, Sinclair interjected, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd had this exact conversation 1,000 times before, are proving exactly why the shadows are winning. The words landed like physical blows. The shadows, Sinclair continued, don't need to fire a single shot. They just need to put you in the same room and watch you destroy each other. That's their entire strategy, identify existing conflicts, amplify them, and sit back while civilizations tear themselves apart. And right now, you're giving them exactly what they want. Kosh moved into the viewscreen's pickup range, its encounter suit drawing startled reactions from both Carr and Londo. The humans, Kosh said, ask the correct question. Not, who is right, but, who benefits from your conflict? Carr stared at the Vorlon, and for the first time since the conversation began, something like uncertainty crossed his features. You're here. That means the situation is more serious than just a few displaced ships. The shadows, Kosh confirmed, have found a new garden. They will plant seeds. They will nurture hatred. And when the harvest comes, civilizations will burn. Londo's aristocratic facade cracked, revealing genuine fear beneath. And let me guess. The Vorlons have arrived to guide us toward the proper response. To dictate how younger races should conduct themselves. No, Kosh said. We will watch. We will judge. And if you prove unworthy, we will allow the shadows to teach you the lesson you refuse to learn. The channel went silent. Two ancient enemies, one ancient manipulator, all suspended in a moment where the future hung in the balance. Sisko made his decision. Captain Carr, Ambassador Londo, I'm formally inviting both of you to Deep Space Nine for a diplomatic conference. Captain Sheridan, Delenn, and representatives from the Federation will mediate. You will have 48 hours to present your cases, explain your histories, and work toward a ceasefire agreement. If you refuse, I will have no choice but to classify both your vessels as threats to Federation security and respond accordingly. You would fight us? Carr asked, more curious than offended. I would defend civilian populations from military aggression, Sisko replied. Whether that means fighting you, restraining you, or simply escorting you to the borders of Federation space is entirely up to you. Londo studied Sisko for a long moment, then smiled, a genuine expression, almost respectful. Very well, Commander. We will attend your conference. But I make no promises about cooperation beyond that. Neither do I, Carr said. But I am curious to see how this Federation of yours handles conflicts it doesn't understand. It will be educational. Both channels closed. Sisko exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of what he'd just committed to. A peace conference between species who'd spent generations at war, mediated by a federation that had no context for their grievances, overshadowed by ancient beings with their own agendas. Benjamin, Dax said softly, you know this could be a trap. The shadows could be manipulating all of us. I know, Sisko replied. But if we don't try to find a peaceful solution, we're no better than they are. And I refuse to believe that the Federation's principles only work when dealing with conflicts we understand. Delenn placed a hand on his shoulder. You have chosen the hard path, Commander. The right path. But know this, the shadows will not stand idly by while you attempt to forge peace. They will do everything in their power to ensure this conference fails. Then, Sisko said, squaring his shoulders, we better make sure we're ready for them. In the darkness between stars, the shadow vessel phased back into normal space. Inside its organic hull, something that might have been laughter echoed through dimensions human minds weren't meant to perceive. The game had begun. Deep Space Nine's wardroom had hosted diplomatic conferences before, Cardassian military officers, Bajoran provisional government ministers, even Dominion Vorta with their unsettling smiles and genetically programmed loyalty. But nothing in the station's recent history compared to the gathering Sisko now observed through the transparent aluminum viewport separating the wardroom from the security office. On one side of the conference table sat Carr, flanked by two Narn officers whose bearing suggested military special forces. Their weapons had been surrendered at the airlock, standard protocol, but their posture remained combat-ready, eyes constantly scanning for threats. Opposite them, Londo Mollari reclined with calculated casualness, accompanied by a young Centauri woman whose elaborate hairstyle and diplomatic credentials identified her as a member of the Centauri nobility. Londo had surrendered no weapons because, as he'd cheerfully explained to Odo, Centauri diplomats prefer poison to phasers, far more civilized, and considerably harder to detect. Odo had not found this amusing. Between the two factions sat Delenn and Sinclair, with Sisko positioned at the table's head. Kira stood near the door, hand resting casually near her phaser. Worf occupied the opposite corner, his presence a silent reminder that Starfleet's commitment to peaceful resolution didn't mean they were unprepared for violence. Kosh had declined to attend physically, but everyone in the room could feel its presence, a weight in the air, a sense of being observed by something vast and patient. Gentlemen, Ambassador, Sisko began, his voice carrying the formal tone he'd cultivated during years of Starfleet diplomatic training. Thank you for agreeing to this conference. I understand the circumstances of your arrival here were traumatic and unexpected. My goal today is simple: establish a framework for peaceful coexistence while we work to return you to your home universe. A noble sentiment, Londo said, swirling the drink he'd somehow smuggled through security. But I wonder, Commander, if your Federation has ever dealt with a conflict quite like ours. The history between Centauri and Narn spans centuries. It cannot be resolved with 48 hours of polite conversation. Kar's growl was low and dangerous. History. You speak of history as if it's some abstract academic subject. I lived through your occupation, Malari. I watched Centauri soldiers execute my father for the crime of teaching Narn children our own language. I saw mass drivers, those same weapons you fired at my ship yesterday, reduce entire cities to rubble because some provincial governor had offended a Centauri noble's pride. And I, Londo countered, his casual demeanor cracking slightly, watched Narn death squads torture Centauri civilians during the liberation. I saw your people desecrate religious sites, execute prisoners without trial, and celebrate the destruction of colonies that had existed for 300 years. Do not pretend your hands are clean, Kar. We have both done terrible things in the name of our peoples. There is a difference, Kar said coldly, between fighting for freedom and fighting for conquest. Is there? Londo leaned forward. Tell me, when Narn forces bombed the Centauri agricultural station on Rajish 3, killing 200 civilians, was that freedom? When your government executed Centauri prisoners on live broadcasts, was that liberation? Or was it revenge dressed in righteous language? Sisko raised his hand. Gentlemen, this is exactly the kind of escalation we need to avoid. You're both reciting grievances to justify continued hostility. But what I need to understand is this. What would peace actually look like? Not justice, not victory, peace. The question hung in the room like a challenge. Kar was first to respond. Peace would require Centauri acknowledgement of their crimes. Reparations for a century of occupation. Guarantees that they will never again attempt to subjugate other species. Acceptable, Londo said, surprising everyone. On the condition that Narn forces withdraw from all disputed border territories, submit to independent arbitration regarding war crimes committed during the liberation, and agree to a demilitarized zone monitored by neutral observers. Kar's eyes widened. You would actually agree to reparations? The Centauri Republic, Londo said carefully, is not what it once was. Our economy is failing, our military stretched thin, our political system corrupt beyond redemption. Continued war with the Narn serves no purpose except to drain resources we cannot spare. If your people can be satisfied with acknowledgement and symbolic reparations rather than crippling financial demands, then yes, I would recommend such an agreement to the Centauran. For the first time since the conference began, genuine surprise flickered across Kar's reptilian features. You speak as if you actually want peace. I speak, Londo said quietly, as someone who has seen too many friends die for causes that benefited only those too cowardly to fight themselves. I am tired, Kar. My people are tired. And if this dimensional accident offers an opportunity to end a conflict that serves neither of us, then perhaps it is a blessing in disguise. Delenn spoke for the first time, her voice gentle but firm. What you are both describing is the foundation for a lasting peace. Acknowledgement of wrongs on both sides, commitment to arbitration and reconciliation, willingness to compromise for the greater good. In our universe, such agreements have been brokered through the Babylon 5 station. A neutral meeting ground where grievances can be aired and solutions negotiated. Except, Sinclair added, Babylon 5 is now just a fragment floating in someone else's space. The infrastructure that supported those negotiations, the Earth Alliance neutrality, the Minbari guarantee of security, the League of Non-Aligned Worlds providing mediation, doesn't exist here. Sisko saw the opening. But the Federation does. We have extensive experience with post-conflict reconciliation. The Bajoran-Cardassian situation alone provides a framework for how former occupiers and occupied can work toward mutual understanding. Major Kira herself fought in the Bajoran resistance. She understands both the desire for justice and the necessity of moving beyond vengeance. Kira stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd lived the same cycle of violence being discussed. The Cardassians occupied Bajorans for 50 years. They strip-mined our resources, destroyed our culture, killed millions. When they finally left, there were many in the resistance who wanted revenge. Who wanted every Cardassian in the sector to pay for what had been done. And yet you work alongside them, Carr observed, his tone suggesting he found this either admirable or naive. I work alongside some of them, Kira corrected. The ones who acknowledge what their government did. The ones who understand that occupation was wrong and are willing to help build something better. But I've also fought Cardassians who refused to accept responsibility, who claimed they were bringing civilization to Bajorans. Those people, I can't forgive. Maybe I never will. That, Carr said slowly, is perhaps the most honest thing anyone has said in this room. You do not pretend that peace means forgetting. You acknowledge that some wounds cannot heal. But, Sisko interjected, those wounds don't have to define the future. Major Kira and I don't always agree. Her experiences give her a perspective I can't fully understand. But we work together because we share a common goal, protecting Bajorans and preventing future atrocities. Londo was watching Sisko with newfound respect. You are not what I expected, Commander. Most humans in our universe speak of peace as if it's a simple matter of everyone agreeing to be civilized. You understand that it's messy, complicated, and requires uncomfortable compromises. I understand, Sisko said, that perfect justice is impossible. But functional coexistence is achievable if both sides are willing to prioritize survival over vindication. The conference room's comm system chirped. Ops to Commander Sisko, came Dax's voice, carefully controlled but with an edge of urgency. Benjamin, we have a situation. Go ahead, Dax. Long-range sensors are detecting anomalous readings in Sector 7-3. It's the shadow vessel. It's moving. Every head in the wardroom turned toward the viewport overlooking the docking ring. In the distance, against the backdrop of Bayer's curve, the black ship phased into visibility. Even at this distance, its wrongness was apparent, angles that hurt to look at directly, surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Where is it heading? Sisko demanded. Toward the Bajoran agricultural platform on the third moon. Commander, there are 12,000 civilians on that platform. No defensive systems, minimal shielding. If that thing attacks. Carr stood abruptly. The shadows do not attack directly. They manipulate, they corrupt, they turn allies into enemies. If they're approaching a civilian target, it's not to destroy it, it's to make someone else destroy it. He's right, Sinclair confirmed, his expression grim. This is a classic shadow tactic. They'll do something to make it look like the Narn or Centauri are responsible. Then they'll sit back and watch the Federation tear itself apart trying to assign blame. Londo's face had gone pale. Or they'll manipulate one of our ships into firing. Use their telepathic abilities to influence a weapons officer, trigger a malfunction that results in civilian casualties. Red alert, Sisko ordered. All hands to battle stations. Dax, get the Defiant prepped for immediate departure. I want every available runabout position between that shadow vessel and the agricultural platform. Commander, Delenn said urgently, your weapons will not harm them. Shadow vessels phase between dimensions, conventional firepower passes through harmlessly. Then what do we use? Kira demanded. Light, Delenn replied. Intense, focused electromagnetic radiation. Their organic hulls are vulnerable to concentrated energy across the full spectrum. But you'll need The station's main deflector array, O'Brien's voice cut in over the comm, if we reconfigure it to emit a broad-spectrum burst, essentially turn it into a giant flashlight, we might be able to force the shadow ship into normal space long enough to target it conventionally. Do it, Sisko ordered. Chief, you have 5 minutes to make it work. I'll need 10. You have 5. Carr moved toward the door. My ship has experience fighting shadows. We should coordinate our attack patterns. Londo stood as well. The Centauri have developed tactics for dealing with phasing vessels. I can provide technical specifications. Sisko looked between them. Two enemies, moments ago rehearsing centuries-old grievances, now offering to fight side by side against a common threat. Major Kira, coordinate with both captains. Get their tactical data integrated into our defense grid. Worf, I want you on the Defiance weapons systems. If we get a clean shot at that shadow vessel, I want it to count. As the room emptied, Sisko caught Delen's eye. This is what you meant, isn't it? When you said the shadows amplify existing conflicts. They don't just manipulate individuals, they manipulate situations. Force people into impossible choices. Yes, Delen said. And now you must make one. If the shadow vessel does provoke an attack on those civilians, if it makes it appear that the Narn or Centauri are responsible, what will you do? Will you maintain your commitment to neutrality, or will you take sides based on incomplete information? Sisko's jaw tightened. I'll do what I always do, Ambassador. I'll find the truth, protect innocent lives, and make sure anyone responsible, human, Narn, Centauri, or Shadow, answers for their actions. Even, Delenn asked quietly, if the truth is that there are no good choices. That every option results in someone dying. Sisko met her gaze. Especially then. Because that's when leadership matters most. On the view screen, the shadow vessel continued its approach, a wound in space sliding toward unsuspecting civilians. And somewhere in the darkness, ancient eyes watched to see whether this new universe would prove worthy of salvation. Or merely another garden to burn. The Defiance Bridge was a study in controlled chaos. Sisko watched 3 separate tactical displays simultaneously, the shadow vessel's erratic approach vector, the agricultural platform's evacuation status, and the power readings from Deep Space Nine's hastily reconfigured deflector array. None of the data was encouraging. Platform Administrator reports they've evacuated 6,000 civilians to transport ships, Kira said from Tactical. But the remaining 6,000 are in hydroponics bays 3 through 7. Those sections can't be depressurized safely, the plant systems are too integrated with life support. Time until the shadow vessel reaches weapons range? Sisko asked. At its current speed, 4 minutes. But Benjamin. Daxa's hands moved across her console, pulling up enhanced sensor data. It's not moving toward the platform anymore. It's circling it. Like a predator evaluating prey. Worf's growl rumbled through the bridge. Psychological warfare. The shadows want the civilians to panic, to create chaos that will complicate evacuation efforts. It's working, O'Brien reported from the engineering station. I'm monitoring civilian comm channels. People are trampling each other trying to reach the transports. Station security is requesting Starfleet assistance to maintain order. Sisko's comm badge chirped. Carr to Defiant. Commander, my weapons officer reports unusual neural activity among the crew. Intrusive thoughts, violent impulses, symptoms consistent with shadow telepathic manipulation. A second channel opened immediately. Mollari to Sisko. We're experiencing the same phenomenon. Several of my officers are reporting compulsions to fire on the Narn vessel. I've locked out weapons control, but I don't know how long those lockouts will hold against telepathic override. Delenn was right, Sinclair's voice joined the channel. He was aboard a runabout, coordinating the evacuation. The shadows aren't going to attack directly. They're going to make us attack each other, with civilians caught in the crossfire. Sisko made his decision in the space between heartbeats. All ships, fall back to position Delta 7. Create a defensive perimeter around the platform, but do not, I repeat, do not, activate weapons systems. If the Shadows can't trigger an accident with armed vessels, they'll have to reveal themselves. Sir, Worf objected, disarming in the face of an enemy is tactically unsound. So is playing into their hands, Sisko countered. They want us to fire. So we don't fire. Chief, what's the status on that deflector modification? 90 seconds to full power, O'Brien replied. But Commander, I'm reading something strange. The Shadow vessel's energy signature is fluctuating. It's almost like it's calling something. Dax's console erupted with alerts. New contact. It's, oh, no. Benjamin, the Vorlons ship is moving. It's on an intercept course with the Shadow vessel. On the main view screen, the graceful organic ship accelerated with impossible speed, positioning itself between the Shadow vessel and the agricultural platform. Golden light began building along its hull, not weapons, something else. Something that made reality itself seem to shimmer and distort. The Vorlons and Shadows are going to fight, Sinclair said, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. Right here, right now, with 12,000 civilians less than 50 kilometers away. Can we stop them? Kira demanded. No one stops the first ones, Delenn replied, her voice carrying over the calm from her position on DS9. They fought a war that lasted 1,000 years and nearly destroyed the galaxy. When Vorlons and Shadows clash, younger races can only survive by staying out of the way. The Shadow vessel phased fully into normal space, its black hull bristling with weapons that looked more like organic growths than technology. Spines of dark energy extended from its central mass, each one capable of tearing through capital ship armor. The Vorlon ship responded. Not with weapons, with light. Pure, searing electromagnetic radiation across every spectrum simultaneously, the kind of energy that would fry unshielded sensors and burn through optical systems. The Defiance viewscreen automatically polarized, but even filtered, the intensity was stunning. Chief, Sisko said urgently, whatever you're doing with that deflector array, do it now. Deflector at full power. Initiating broad-spectrum pulse in 3, 2, 1, now. Deep Space Nine's main deflector dish, typically used for navigational scanning and clearing debris from the station's path, transformed into a lighthouse. A column of concentrated light, spanning from infrared to ultraviolet, stabbed across space and struck the Shadow vessel amidships. The effect was immediate and violent. The black ship convulsed, its phasing ability disrupted, forced fully into normal space. Dark energy crackled along its hull, and for the first time since arriving in this universe, the Shadow vessel appeared vulnerable. Target locked, Worf announced. Quantum torpedoes armed and ready. Hold fire, Sisko ordered. Let's see what the Vorlons do. The Vorlon ship rotated, presenting its ventral surface to the now solid Shadow vessel. Dozens of openings appeared, and from each emerged a tendril of golden energy, not destructive, binding. The light wrapped around the Shadow ship like threads, tightening, constricting. They're not trying to destroy it, Dax said, wonder in her voice. They're trying to capture it. Why? Kira asked. If the Shadows are as dangerous as everyone says, why not just eliminate the threat? Delenn's response came slowly, weighted with implications, because eliminating the Shadows means embracing their philosophy, that problems are solved through destruction rather than understanding. The Vorlons believe in order, in containing chaos rather than annihilating it. Even, Sinclair added grimly, when containment is arguably the worse option. The Shadow vessel thrashed against its golden restraints, dark energy surging along its hull. For a moment it seemed the binding would hold. Then the black ship simply stopped. Stopped moving, stopped fighting, became perfectly, unnaturally still. That's not good, Kar's voice came over the comm. When shadows go quiet, it means they're planning something. The shadow vessel spoke. Not through communication systems, not through subspace frequencies, it spoke directly into the minds of every conscious being within 100,000 kilometers. The voice was not sound but concept, not words but raw understanding forced into neural pathways. You defend order. You fear chaos. But chaos is growth. Chaos is evolution. Chaos is life itself. We do not destroy. We liberate. Sisko felt the words worming into his consciousness, felt the seductive logic behind them. Every conflict the Federation had ever faced, the Borg, the Dominion, even internal political struggles, could be reframed as growth through adversity. The shadow philosophy wasn't wrong, it was just, untempered by compassion, unfiltered by morality. Don't listen to it. Sinclair shouted over the comm, that's how they operate, they make chaos sound reasonable, make conflict seem inevitable. But what they're really saying is that the strong deserve to dominate the weak, that suffering is just the cost of evolution. The Vorlon ship responded, and Kasha's voice resonated with harmonic certainty. Chaos without purpose is entropy. Order without flexibility is stagnation. The younger races must choose their own path, not have it dictated by ancient fear or ancient arrogance. The golden bindings tightened, and the shadow vessel shrieked, a sound that existed outside normal acoustic ranges, a vibration that made the Defiance hull shudder. Dark energy exploded outward, shattering the Vorlon restraints, and the black ship phased partially out of reality, becoming a flickering ghost superimposed over normal space. It's adapting, O'Brien warned. The deflector pulse isn't holding it anymore. It's learning to operate partially in our dimension and partially outside it. Then we hit it with everything, Worf said. Quantum torpedoes, phasers, photon charges. Saturate the area with so much firepower that it can't phase without intersecting a detonation. Negative, Sisko said. The agricultural platform is too close. Even with precision targeting, the debris field from that much ordnance would tear through their shields. So what do we do? Kira demanded. Just watch while these ancient beings play out their philosophical argument with our lives hanging in the balance. Sisko stared at the view screen, mind racing through tactical scenarios and discarding each one as unworkable. The Federation's advantage had always been superior technology combined with ethical clarity. But against opponents who existed before the Federation, before humanity, before the concepts of ethics and civilization as currently understood, what leverage did they have? The answer came not from Starfleet tactical doctrine, but from experience. From years spent as the emissary of the prophets, negotiating between linear and nonlinear perspectives. From understanding that sometimes the most effective action was not force, but choice. Open a channel, Sisko said. All frequencies, all vessels, including the Shadow and Vorlon ships. Channel open, Dax confirmed. Sisko stood, addressed not just the crews under his command, but the ancient beings treating this sector as their personal philosophical battleground. Kosh, Shadow Vessel, I am Commander Benjamin Sisko of the United Federation of Planets, emissary of the Prophets, and the commanding officer of this region. You came to our universe uninvited. You brought your war, your philosophies, and your conflicts into space that doesn't belong to you. And now you're demanding that we choose sides in an argument that predates our species. The bridge was silent. Every eye was on him. Well, I'm not choosing, Sisko continued. Not order, not chaos. Not Vorlon guidance or shadow liberation. The Federation was built on the principle that species have the right to determine their own futures without interference from more powerful civilizations. And that principle applies to you as much as it applies to us. You are young, the Shadow Vessel hissed. You do not understand. I understand perfectly, Sisko interrupted. You're both so convinced of your own righteousness that you can't imagine a third option. But there is one. It's called walking away. The Vorlon ship pulsed with golden light. Kasha's voice resonated with something that might have been amusement or offense. You presume to lecture the first ones? I presume, Sisko said, to protect the 12,000 civilians on that platform. If you want to continue your war, do it somewhere else. Fight in deep space, fight in the Gamma Quadrant, fight in whatever interdimensional battlefield you prefer. But not here. Not in my sector. Not with Federation citizens caught in the crossfire. Silence stretched across subspace. The shadow vessel flickered, phasing in and out of visibility. The Vorlon ship maintained its position, golden energy crackling along its hull. Then, impossibly, both ships withdrew. Not retreating, repositioning. Creating distance, establishing a perimeter that placed them light minutes away from the agricultural platform, from DS9, from the civilian targets they'd been prepared to sacrifice as part of their ancient conflict. They're standing down. Kira said, disbelief coloring her voice. Not standing down, Delenn corrected. Acknowledging. The first ones respect strength, but they respect principled defiance even more. Commander Sisko just demonstrated both. Kara's channel crackled with what might have been laughter. Well. Perhaps this Federation of yours is not as naive as I thought. You just told 2 billion-year-old beings to take their war elsewhere, and they listened. They didn't listen because I'm strong, Sisko said quietly. They listened because I was right. On the view screen, the Vorlon and shadow vessels faced each other across the black. Still hostile, still preparing for conflict, but no longer using Federation space as their arena. All ships, resume evacuation operations, Sisko ordered. Get those civilians to safety. We'll deal with our uninvited guests once everyone's secure. As the Defiant maneuvered back toward the platform, Dax caught Sisko's eye. Benjamin, you realize you just inserted yourself into a conflict that's been ongoing since before humanity existed. The Shadows and Vorlons aren't going to forget this. Good, Sisko replied. Because I'm not done talking to them yet. The briefing room on Deep Space Nine had been reconfigured for what Starfleet intelligence would later classify as the most unusual intelligence exchange in Federation history. On one side of the table sat Captain Sheridan, Delenn, and Ambassador Sinclair. On the other, three figures who should not have been in the same room together without killing each other, Kar, Londo Mollari, and a human woman whose presence made everyone uncomfortable. Her name was Talia Winters. She was a commercial telepath, Psi Corps rating P5, and according to the credentials she presented at the airlock, she'd been aboard the Babylon 5 station fragment when it was pulled through the dimensional rift. Now she sat with the rigid posture of someone trying very hard not to read the minds of everyone around her. Sisko stood at the head of the table, with Odo positioned near the door and Kira at his right hand. Dax had remained on ops, coordinating with Starfleet Command, who were having considerable difficulty accepting that a parallel universe's diplomatic crisis had just become the Federation's problem. Ms. Winters, Sisko began, you volunteered to work with our security teams to identify potential shadow telepathic influence. I appreciate your willingness to help, but I need to understand the nature of your abilities. In the Federation, telepaths like betazoids operate under strict ethical guidelines. How does your Psi Corps function? Talia's smile was professional but didn't reach her eyes. The Psi Corps is a registered organization under Earth Alliance law. Telepaths are identified in childhood, trained to control our abilities, and assigned work based on our ratings. P5 is commercial grade. I can read surface thoughts with consent, detect deception, facilitate business negotiations. I can't probe deep memories or override someone's will. Can't or won't? Odo asked, his shapeshifter's instincts detecting nuances invisible to most. Both, Talia replied carefully. The Psi Corps embeds neural blocks in telepaths above P3 rating. If I try to use my abilities beyond authorized parameters, I experience severe pain and potential permanent damage. It's insurance against abuse of power. Kira's expression hardened. That sounds less like training and more like control. The Federation doesn't implant pain-inducing devices in telepathic species. The Federation, Talia said, and her tone carried edges of something that might have been envy or resentment, apparently lives in a very different universe than we do. In my reality, unregulated telepaths are feared, justifiably. There have been incidents of rogue telepaths manipulating governments, corporations, even starting wars. The Psi Corps may be imperfect, but it prevents worse alternatives. Sheridan shifted uncomfortably. Commander Sisko, I should mention that relations between normal humans and telepaths in our universe are complicated. The Psi Corps wield significant political power, and there are those who believe telepaths should be treated as second-class citizens. It's an ongoing civil rights issue. One we don't have time to resolve today, Sisko said, though he filed the information away for later consideration. Ms. Winters, can you detect shadow influence? Captain Sheridan mentioned they use telepathic manipulation. I can detect it, Talia confirmed, but I can't block it. Shadow telepathy operates on a frequency that human telepaths can sense but not counter. It's like hearing a language you don't speak. You know someone's talking, but you can't understand or respond effectively. Carr leaned forward, his reptilian features intent. Then what good are you to us? If you cannot stop the shadows from manipulating our crews, you're merely a sensor with limited range. I can identify who's been compromised, Talia said evenly, meeting the Narn's gaze without flinching. Early detection means you can isolate affected personnel before they act on shadow-induced compulsions. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. She's right, Sinclair interjected. During the Shadow War in our universe, commercial telepaths were our first line of defense against infiltration. They couldn't stop shadow agents, but they could sound the alarm. Londo swirled his drink. He'd somehow obtained more despite Odo's confiscation of his original supply. This is all very educational, but I believe we're avoiding the larger question. Commander Sisko ordered both ancient vessels to withdraw, and miraculously, they complied. What happens when they decide your authority is irrelevant? Then we adapt, Sisko said. But first, I need to understand what we're actually dealing with. Delenn, you mentioned the Vorlons and Shadows fought a war 1 billion years ago. What ended it? Delenn's expression grew distant, as if recalling ancient history transmitted through generations. They didn't end it. They paused. The first ones, there were more than just Vorlons and Shadows, decided that their conflicts were devastating younger races caught in the crossfire. Most of the first ones departed for the Rim, the galaxy's edge, leaving younger species to develop without interference. Most, but not all, Sheridan added. The Vorlons stayed to guide younger races toward order and enlightenment. The Shadows stayed to push younger races toward strength through conflict. Both believe they're helping. Both are actually just imposing their philosophies on species too weak to resist. Until now, Carr observed. You have resisted, Commander. You told ancient beings to take their war elsewhere. But will they respect that boundary when it becomes inconvenient? The question was interrupted by Dax's voice over the comm. Benjamin, you need to see this. We're receiving a transmission from the Vorlon ship. It's addressed to you personally. Sisko exchanged glances with his officers. Routed to the briefing room. The wall-mounted view screen activated, displaying not an image but pure golden light that seemed to coalesce into something approximating a humanoid form. Kasha's voice resonated through the room, but this time without the harmonic overtones, almost conversational, almost human. Commander Sisko. Emissary. We have observed your actions. We have judged your words. You demonstrate understanding beyond your years. I appreciate the compliment, Sisko said carefully, but I prefer concrete information over philosophical assessment. What do the Vorlons want with the Federation? The question, Kosh replied, assumes we want anything. Vorlon purpose is guidance. Younger races require direction, lest they destroy themselves through ignorance and passion. Sisko felt his jaw tighten. We've managed just fine without your guidance for 300 years. The Federation has built a society based on cooperation, scientific advancement, and peaceful exploration. What makes you think we need ancient beings dictating our development? The golden light pulsed, and when Kosh spoke again, there was something in its voice that might have been approval. You do not need. This is correct. But others do. The Narn and Centauri war demonstrates the failure of unguided evolution. The Dominion represents the danger of unchecked ambition. The Borg embody the horror of order without conscience. You know about the Borg? Kira asked, surprised. We know many things. The Borg are young, 10,000 years, perhaps less. They seek perfection through assimilation. But perfection cannot be imposed. It must be achieved through understanding. And you plan to guide the Borg toward understanding? Odo asked skeptically. We plan nothing. We observe. We wait. And when younger races prove worthy, we acknowledge their potential. Londo set down his drink with deliberate care. Tell me, Kosh, when the Centauri were conquering half the known galaxy, did the Vorlons observe? When my people enslaved the Narn, bombed their cities, destroyed their culture, were you waiting then? Or do you only intervene when it's convenient? The golden light dimmed slightly. The Centauri were not ready. They chose domination over cooperation. They refused guidance. We refused subjugation, Londo corrected coldly. There is a difference. Perhaps, Kosh acknowledged. But consider, if the Vorlons had intervened during Centauri expansion, would you have learned the lessons you now carry? Would you understand, as you clearly do, that empire built on oppression inevitably collapses? The words hung in the air like an indictment. Londo's face had gone pale, but he didn't look away from the screen. Carr spoke, his voice rough with barely controlled anger. And the Narn. When we were enslaved, when our children were taken, when our religious sites were desecrated, was that a lesson too? Were we learning valuable truths while Centauri soldiers executed civilians? Yes, Kosh said simply. The room exploded. Carr surged to his feet, Londo shouted something in Centauri, Kira's hand went to her phaser, and even Delenn looked shaken by the Vorlon's bluntness. Sisko's voice cut through the chaos like a phaser blast. Enough. Everyone froze. Sisko stood, walked to the view screen, and addressed the golden light directly. Let me make something very clear, Kosh. I don't care how old you are, how wise you think you've become, or what philosophical justifications you've developed for allowing suffering. In Federation space, we don't accept that atrocities serve educational purposes. We don't believe that oppression teaches valuable lessons. And we certainly don't tolerate beings who claim moral authority while standing by during genocide. You judge us, Kosh said, and for the first time, there was something defensive in its tone. Yes, Sisko replied. I do. Because judgment isn't reserved for ancient beings. Anyone who has power and chooses not to use it when innocents suffer is complicit. That applies to Starfleet officers, Federation admirals, and apparently, to Vorlons. The light flickered, pulsed, became almost agitated. You do not understand the complexity. I understand that right now, in this moment, you have a choice, Sisko interrupted. You can continue treating younger races as children to be guided, problems to be solved, experiments to be observed. Or you can recognize that we're sentient beings with the right to make our own mistakes and achieve our own victories. Not because you permit it, but because it's fundamentally right. Silence stretched across the connection. Then Kasha's voice returned, quieter, almost contemplative. The shadows say the same. That interference is wrong. That younger races must forge their own paths through conflict. The shadows believe in chaos for its own sake, Delenn said firmly. Commander Sisko believes in something different, not order or chaos, but choice. The freedom to determine one's own future without manipulation from either extreme. A third path, Kosh mused. Neither Vorlon nor Shadow. Interesting. But dangerous. Without guidance, younger races destroy themselves. Without conflict, they stagnate. History demonstrates this repeatedly. History, Sisko said, is written by those who survived it. Maybe the races that destroyed themselves would have done better without ancient beings pushing them in one direction or another. Maybe the Federation exists precisely because no first ones were here to guide or challenge humanity during its development. The golden light began to fade. You give us much to consider, emissary. But consider this in return. The shadows will not be as patient as we are. They will test you, push you, attempt to prove that your Federation's ideals collapse under sufficient pressure. And when they do, remember that the Vorlons offered guidance you refused. I'll remember, Sisko said. But I'll also remember that guidance without consent is just another word for control. The transmission ended. The briefing room remained silent for a long moment. Then Carr began to laugh, a harsh, bitter sound that nevertheless carried genuine amusement. What's funny? Kira demanded. This, Carr gestured around the room. All of this. In our universe, the younger races spent years debating how to respond to the Vorlons and Shadows. We formed alliances, built weapons, developed strategies. And here, in your universe, Commander Sisko simply tells them they're wrong and demands they respect Federation sovereignty. And it worked, Londo added, shaking his head in disbelief. Ancient beings who've manipulated galactic politics for 1 billion years, chastised like misbehaving children. If I hadn't witnessed it personally, I'd never believe it. Sheridan was studying Sisko with newfound respect. In our universe, we eventually learned to stand up to the first ones. But it took years, and cost millions of lives. You did it in a single conversation. Don't congratulate me yet, Sisko said grimly. Kosh said the shadows would test us. That means whatever happens next is going to be worse than anything we've faced so far. As if summoned by his words, alarms began shrieking throughout the station. Sisko to Ops, he barked. Report. Dax's voice came through, strained and urgent. Benjamin, long-range sensors just detected multiple contacts emerging from subspace. Configuration unknown, but they're broadcasting Earth Alliance identification codes. Looks like, oh, no. It's Section 31, Benjamin. And they've brought friends. Sisko's blood ran cold. Section 31, Starfleet's Black Ops Division, operating outside Federation oversight, conducting operations that officially didn't exist. If they were here, it meant someone in Starfleet Command had decided the Babylon 5 situation required extra-legal solutions. And in Sisko's experience, Section 31 never brought good news. The 3 ships that dropped out of warp at the edge of the Bajoran system were Starfleet vessels, at least technically. 2 Nebula-class cruisers flanked a modified Excelsior-class starship, all bearing registry numbers that, according to Dax's immediate database check, corresponded to ships currently listed as undergoing extended maintenance at classified locations. Section 31 didn't officially exist. Therefore, Section 31 didn't officially operate starships. The bureaucratic fiction fooled no one, least of all Sisko, who dealt with their agents before. Hail them, Sisko ordered as he strode onto Ops. The station's nerve center hummed with tension, every officer aware that the situation had just escalated from complicated to potentially catastrophic. The viewscreen activated, revealing a human woman in her 50s, wearing a Starfleet uniform with no rank insignia, no ship assignment, nothing that would identify her beyond the vague authority her bearing projected. Her expression was pleasant, professional, and absolutely uncompromising. Commander Sisko. I'm Director Koval, no relation to the late Romulan senator, I assure you. Section 31 has been monitoring the dimensional incursion in your sector. We're here to assist. Assist, Sisko repeated flatly. You'll forgive me if I'm skeptical. Section 31's idea of assistance usually involves violations of the Prime Directive, unauthorized weapons deployment, and convenient accidents that eliminate inconvenient witnesses. Koval's smile didn't waver. Your reputation for directness is well earned, Commander. I appreciate candor, so let me be frank. The arrival of multiple ships from a parallel universe, including vessels utilizing technology centuries beyond current Federation capabilities, represents a clear security threat. Starfleet Command has authorized Section 31 to evaluate, contain, and if necessary, neutralize that threat. Neutralize, Kira said, her voice sharp. You mean destroy? I mean protect Federation interests, Koval corrected smoothly. The Vorlon and Shadow vessels alone represent existential dangers. According to the intelligence you've transmitted to Starfleet, these beings claim to be billions of years old, possess technology that can disable entire fleets, and engage in telepathic manipulation that our defenses can't counter. That's not a diplomatic opportunity, Commander, that's an extinction-level threat. Sisko's hands gripped the railing overlooking ops. Those beings have also agreed to keep their conflicts away from civilian populations. We've established a functional ceasefire and begun diplomatic negotiations with all parties involved. Negotiations, Koval said, and now her professional veneer cracked slightly, revealing something harder underneath. With species who consider genocide a teaching opportunity? With ancient beings who treat sentient civilizations like laboratory experiments? Commander, you're an experienced officer. You know as well as I do that some threats can't be negotiated with, they can only be eliminated. Director Koval, came a new voice, and Sheridan appeared on a split screen beside her. He was broadcasting from the Agamemnon, looking considerably more haggard than when Sisko had last seen him. I'm Captain John Sheridan, Earth Alliance. I've spent years dealing with Vorlons and Shadows. Whatever you're planning, I strongly advise against it. Attempting to destroy those ships will only prove to them that younger races are exactly as barbaric as they believe. Koval's attention shifted to Sheridan, evaluating him with the cold precision of an intelligence operative. Captain Sheridan. Your service record in our database is interesting. You're listed as killed in action at Jadam in 2260, yet here you are, alive and broadcasting from a ship that shouldn't exist. Care to explain that discrepancy? Sheridan's expression darkened. In my universe, I went to Jadam, the Shadow homeworld, and destroyed their main city with 2 nuclear weapons. I died in the process, but was resurrected by the first ones to serve as a bridge between Vorlons and Shadows. The point is, I've fought these beings directly. And I'm telling you that military action will fail. All military action fails, Koval said, until it doesn't. The Borg were considered unstoppable until we found their weaknesses. The Dominion seemed invincible until we adapted our strategies. Every threat, no matter how ancient or powerful, can be defeated if you're willing to pay the price. And what price are you willing to pay? Sisko demanded. How many Federation citizens are acceptable casualties in your effort to eliminate a threat that's currently contained? As many as necessary, Koval said without hesitation. That's the difference between Section 31 and Starfleet Command, Commander. We're willing to make the hard choices that preserve the Federation, even when those choices violate the comfortable ideals you operate under. The comm system chirped. This is Londo Mollari, broadcasting from the Centauri vessel. Director Koval, I couldn't help but overhear your transmission. Apparently your communication security is not as sophisticated as you believe. I feel compelled to inform you that attempting to destroy a shadow vessel is an act of spectacular stupidity that will result in your ships being torn apart. A second voice joined, Narn regime. I rarely agree with Ambassador Mollari, but he's correct. The shadows have destroyed entire fleets in our universe. Your 3 ships, impressive as they may be, represent target practice. And the Vorlons, Delenn added, her transmission originating from Deep Space Nine, will interpret any attack as proof that your Federation has chosen chaos over order. They will respond not with weapons, but with judgment. And Vorlon judgment is not something your species is prepared to face. Koval listened to each transmission with the patient attention of someone hearing expected objections. Thank you all for your input. Section 31 has reviewed the tactical data, consulted with xenopsychology experts, and developed countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize First One technology. We didn't come here unprepared. What countermeasures? O'Brien demanded from the engineering station. Director, I've analyzed those ships personally. They operate on principles that violate known physics. The shadow vessel phases between dimensions, conventional weapons pass through it. The Vorlon ship has organic technology that adapts to any attack. Unless you've developed something revolutionary in the past 24 hours, you're outmatched. Koval's smile returned, and this time it carried an edge of triumph. Chief O'Brien, we haven't developed anything revolutionary. We've acquired it. 3 hours ago, Section 31 team successfully intercepted and boarded the Babylon 5 station fragment. Among the salvaged technology, we found data cores containing detailed schematics for weapon systems designed specifically to combat Vorlon and shadow vessels. Sisko felt ice form in his gut. You boarded the station fragment? That's a civilian habitat with refugees aboard. Was a civilian habitat, Koval corrected. All personnel have been evacuated to our vessels for debriefing. The station fragment itself is now classified as a strategic asset under Federation jurisdiction. You kidnapped them, Kira said, her voice low and dangerous. You kidnapped civilians from a neutral station and seized their technology. We relocated them for their own safety and acquired technology that threatens Federation security, Koval replied. The legal distinctions are irrelevant. What matters is that we now possess the capability to level the playing field against these First Ones. And Commander Sisko, whether you cooperate or not, we will use it. The view screen split again, this time showing Talia Winters. The telepath looked exhausted, her professional composure cracked. Commander Sisko, they're lying. I can sense it, not through telepathy, they have some kind of psi shielding, but through body language, micro-expressions. Director Koval has no weapon capable of fighting the shadows. This is a bluff to justify military action. MS. Winters, Koval said coldly, your services are no longer required. I suggest you return to your quarters before you force me to take corrective action against an unregistered telepath operating in Federation space. Unregistered? Talia's laugh was bitter. I've committed no crime. I've cooperated fully with Commander Sisko's investigation. You have no authority over me. Actually, Koval said, pulling up a legal document on her pad, under Federation Security Statute 7824, any individual possessing abilities that could compromise national security is subject to detention and evaluation during periods of heightened threat. Your telepathic abilities qualify. You will report to our vessel immediately, or I will classify you as a hostile actor and respond accordingly. Sisko had heard enough. Director Koval, you're operating in my sector, threatening civilians under my protection, and planning military action that could trigger a war with beings we don't understand. I am formally ordering you to stand down, withdraw your vessels, and submit to Starfleet Command oversight. Koval's expression didn't change. Commander, Section 31 operates outside standard Starfleet hierarchy. We answer directly to threats against Federation security. Your orders carry no weight here. Then perhaps mine do, came a new voice, old, weary, but carrying absolute authority. Admiral William Ross appeared on the view screen, broadcasting from Starfleet Command on Earth. The Admiral looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past day, the weight of command evident in every line of his face. Director Koval, I'm ordering Section 31 to stand down effective immediately. The Babylon 5 situation is a first contact scenario, not a military threat. All captured personnel will be returned to Deep Space Nine, all seized technology will be placed under scientific review, and your vessels will withdraw to the Gamma 7 sector pending a full investigation into your actions. Koval's mask slipped, revealing genuine anger beneath. Admiral, with respect, you're making a mistake. These beings represent. I know what they represent, Ross interrupted. I've read Commander Sisko's reports. I've consulted with the Federation Council. And I've reviewed 300 years of Starfleet history, which consistently demonstrates that shooting first and asking questions later results in disasters we spend decades trying to repair. We're not starting a war with billion-year-old civilizations because Section 31 is afraid of threats they don't control. Admiral, Koval began. This is not a debate, Director. Stand down or I will classify your vessels as rogue elements and authorize Commander Sisko to disable them by any means necessary. The comm channels went silent. Every person on every ship held their breath, waiting to see whether Section 31 would accept recall or escalate into the unthinkable. Starfleet firing on Starfleet. Finally, Koval spoke. Very well, Admiral. Section 31 will withdraw. But for the record, when this situation deteriorates, and it will deteriorate, the responsibility lies with Starfleet Command's refusal to take appropriate action. Noted, Ross said. Now release those civilians and transfer all salvaged data to Deep Space Nine. The Section 31 vessels began moving, altering course away from the station. But something in Koval's expression made Sisko uneasy. She'd surrendered too easily, accepted recall without the elaborate legal maneuvering Section 31 typically employed. Admiral, Sisko said carefully, I'd recommend stationing additional vessels in this sector. Section 31 doesn't give up this easily. Already done, Ross replied. The USS Venture and USS Malinch are en route. They'll arrive in 6 hours. Can you maintain the situation until then? I'll do my best, sir. Ross's image faded, leaving only Koval's cold smile on the view screen. Commander Sisko, you've won this round. But I want you to understand something. Section 31 exists because sometimes the Federation's ideals aren't enough. Sometimes you need people willing to make the hard choices, to do what's necessary regardless of moral comfort. When that moment comes, and it always does, you'll wish you'd let us handle this our way. The transmission ended. Sisko stood in the center of ops, surrounded by his crew, aware that he'd just made an enemy of the Federation's most dangerous shadow organization. But more concerning was the certainty that Koval was right about one thing: the situation would deteriorate. The question was whether they'd be ready when it did. The conference room on Deep Space Nine was packed beyond capacity. Sisko had ordered the main wardroom cleared and reconfigured, installing portable holographic projectors that displayed real-time tactical data from every vessel in the sector. Around the table sat representatives from 7 different factions, a diplomatic nightmare that would have been impossible 48 hours ago. Carr and Londo sat at opposite ends, maintaining a careful distance but no longer actively glowering at each other. Sheridan occupied the middle ground with Delenn beside him, the Minbari's presence a calming influence. Sinclair had positioned himself near the door, eyes constantly scanning for threats. Talia Winters stood in the corner, monitoring mental states, her face drawn with exhaustion. Representing the Federation, Sisko, Kira, Dax, Worf, and Odo. Admiral Ross had maintained an open channel from Starfleet Command, his image hovering on one of the holographic displays. And in the center of the table, rendered in perfect holographic detail, floated the Bajoran wormhole. Real-time sensor data showed its energy patterns, normally stable, now fluctuating with dangerous irregularity. The wormhole is destabilizing, Dax explained, her voice carrying the authority of a scientist presenting undeniable facts. When the Babylon 5 vessels came through, they didn't just travel between universes, they tore a hole in dimensional fabric. The prophets are trying to repair it, but the damage is extensive. If the wormhole collapses catastrophically, it could create a subspace rupture that destroys everything within 10 light-years. Including Bajorans, Kira said quietly. Including Bajorans, Dax confirmed. And Deep Space Nine, and every ship currently in the system. We're talking about an explosion equivalent to a supernova, except instead of conventional physics, it would be dimensional cascading. Matter from multiple realities intersecting simultaneously. Carr leaned forward, studying the holographic display. How long until this catastrophic collapse? 72 hours, O'Brien said from the engineering console. Maybe less if something destabilizes it further. And I do mean something. Every energy discharge in this sector affects the wormhole's stability. The Vorlon and Shadow standoff, our weapons tests, even routine warp drive emissions are making it worse. Sheridan's expression was grim. Then we need to get our people home before that deadline. Captain, what are the options for reopening a stable passage to our universe? There aren't any, Dax said bluntly. The wormhole connects the alpha and gamma quadrants of this universe. It was never designed to bridge parallel realities. The only reason you came through at all is because something on your side forced the dimensional breach. The Shadows, Delenn said. They have technology capable of manipulating reality at fundamental levels. If they wanted to escape their universe, bring their conflict to a fresh battlefield, they could have engineered the breach deliberately. You're saying this was intentional? Admiral Ross asked, his voice sharp. That these shadow beings orchestrated an interdimensional invasion? Not invasion, Sinclair corrected. Expansion. The shadows don't conquer in conventional terms. They spread chaos, let civilizations destroy themselves, then move on to the next target. Your universe represents virgin territory, species they haven't manipulated, conflicts they haven't exploited. Londo took a long drink from his ever-present glass. And the Vorlons followed because they always follow. Order chasing chaos, light pursuing darkness, the eternal dance of ancient beings who've forgotten what it's like to actually live instead of simply existing. Poetic, Odo observed dryly, but not helpful. If the shadows can manipulate dimensional barriers, can they stabilize the wormhole? Or are they content to let it collapse and destroy everything? Talia spoke from her corner, her voice strained. I'm sensing something. Telepathic activity from both the Vorlon and Shadow vessels. They're communicating, but not with us. With each other. And with. She pressed fingers to her temples, wincing. With the wormhole itself. Or whatever's inside it. The prophets, Sisko said, sudden understanding dawning. The Shadows and Vorlons are trying to communicate with the prophets. Beings who exist outside linear time would be fascinating to species that old. Kira's hand moved unconsciously to her earring. The prophets protect the celestial temple. If the first ones are threatening them, or trying to manipulate them, they'll defend themselves, Sisko finished. And when beings that exist outside time defend themselves, reality tends to bend in uncomfortable ways. The holographic wormhole pulsed, and every sensor on the station screamed alerts. On the view screen, the wormhole's mouth opened, not in the smooth, controlled fashion typical of ship transits, but violently, tearing space like paper. Energy surge. O'Brien shouted. It's. Light erupted from the wormhole. Not the blue-white of normal transits, but golden and black simultaneously, two colors that shouldn't exist together, fighting for dominance. The Vorlon ship surged forward, bathing the phenomenon in its characteristic radiance. The shadow vessel phased into full visibility, extending tendrils of darkness toward the rift. And from inside the wormhole, the prophet spoke. Not to Sisko alone this time. To everyone. Every conscious mind in the Bajoran system heard words that weren't words, concepts that human language couldn't adequately express, but which translated approximately as. The linear ones bring discord. They must leave. The celestial temple is not for those who walk in shadows or enforce false light. Kasha's voice resonated across all frequencies. The wormhole entities are young. They do not understand the necessity of guidance. The shadow vessel's response was a psychic scream. They do not understand the freedom of chaos. Liberation from their temporal prison. They're both trying to convert the prophets, Dax said, disbelief in her voice. The shadows want to corrupt them, introduce chaos into beings of pure order. The Vorlons want to control them, add non-linear entities to their arsenal of guided species. And the prophets, Kira said, are going to destroy the wormhole rather than submit to either. Sisko stood, mind racing through options and discarding each one as inadequate. The Federation couldn't fight first ones. They couldn't force the prophets to accept foreign entities. They couldn't repair a dimensional breach that was fundamentally incompatible with this universe's physics. But they could do one thing. All vessels, this is Commander Sisko. Prepare for emergency evacuation of all Babylon 5 personnel and technology. We have 72 hours to get everyone and everything away from the wormhole before it collapses. Captain Sheridan, I need your people ready to transfer to Federation ships. Transfer to where? Sheridan asked. Commander, we can't go home. Even if we wanted to risk another dimensional crossing, the wormhole is the only gateway, and it's dying. Then you'll stay, Sisko said. The Federation will grant refugee status to all Babylon 5 personnel. We'll help you integrate into our society, find positions, rebuild your lives. Kara's laugh was harsh. And the Narn and Centauri? Will your Federation house ancient enemies in the same sector? Give us both territory to claim, resources to fight over. No, Sisko said. I'll do something much harder. I'll make you choose. Stay in Federation space and abide by our laws, which means no warfare, no revenge, genuine cooperation, or take your ships and find somewhere else in the galaxy to continue your conflict. You can't enforce that, Londo said, but his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure. I can, Worf rumbled. The Klingon Empire has treaties with the Federation. If Narn or Centauri vessels violate Federation space, they will face Klingon warships. And unlike your species, Klingon enjoy combat for its own sake. Kar and Londo exchanged glances, the first genuine communication between them since arriving. You're serious, Kar said slowly. You'd actually offer us sanctuary, knowing we bring complications your Federation has never faced. The Federation, Admiral Ross said from his display, was founded on the principle that diversity strengthens us. We've integrated species who fought wars lasting centuries. Vulcans and Romulans share common ancestry but chose different philosophical paths. Humans and Klingon were enemies before becoming allies. If the Narn and Centauri want peace, we'll help you achieve it. If you want war, you'll do it somewhere else. Delenn placed a hand on the table, drawing all eyes. There is another option. One that requires courage from all parties. I'm listening, Sisko said. The wormhole will collapse in 72 hours. But before it does, we could attempt a controlled transit. Not back to our universe, the dimensional walls are too damaged, but to somewhere else. The first ones have technology that might allow navigation between realities. If the Vorlons and Shadows can be convinced to cooperate, they could guide our vessels to a third universe. One without Federation, without Dominion, without our histories haunting us. Silence filled the room. You're proposing exile, Sinclair said quietly. Permanent exile to an unknown reality. I'm proposing a fresh start, Delenn corrected. For everyone. The Narn and Centauri could leave their ancient hatreds behind. The first ones could find a new galaxy to philosophically contest. And the Federation could preserve its wormhole, its profits, its safety. Convenient, Kira said, her tone sharp. Ship all the problems somewhere else, let them become another universe's headache. Or, Sheridan said, give people who've been fighting for generations a chance to start over. Major, you fought for Bajoran freedom. Would you have turned down an opportunity to rebuild on a world where Cardassians had never existed? Where the occupation was just a bad dream? Kira's expression softened. I don't know. Maybe. But exile is still exile, no matter how you frame it. Sisko looked around the table, saw the weight of impossible choices on every face. Then he turned to the viewport, where the wormhole pulsed with dying energy, where Vorlon and Shadow ships circled like predators, where the future hung in the balance. We put it to a vote, he said finally. Every person aboard the Babylon 5 vessels, every Narn and Centauri crew member, the first ones themselves, everyone gets a choice. Stay here and integrate into Federation society under our laws. Or take the dimensional transit, risk the unknown, and find a fresh start somewhere else. And if the first ones refuse to help? Carr asked. Sisko smiled grimly. Then I'll remind them that younger races have a bad habit of surprising ancient beings who underestimate us. We've done it twice already this week. Admiral Ross leaned forward on his display. Commander, you're proposing we help facilitate what amounts to interdimensional colonization. The political ramifications alone are irrelevant compared to preventing a subspace rupture that destroys a sector, Sisko interrupted. Admiral, with respect, we're out of good options. We can only choose the least catastrophic path forward. Ross was silent for a long moment, then nodded. Proceed, Commander. You have 72 hours. Make them count. The meeting dissolved, representatives hurrying to their respective ships to begin preparations. As the room emptied, Dax caught Sisko's arm. Benjamin, this is the biggest gamble of your career. If it works, you'll have solved an interdimensional crisis and preserved the wormhole. If it fails, Sisko said quietly, then at least we tried something other than weapons and ultimatums. That has to count for something. In the viewport, the wormhole pulsed again, and for just a moment, Sisko could swear he heard the prophets' voices. The Sisko shows wisdom. Linear existence holds many paths. Choose carefully. 72 hours until the end of everything, or the beginning of something new. The clock was ticking. 60 hours remained. Deep Space Nine had transformed into a coordination center unlike anything in Federation history. Every docking port was occupied, every cargo bay repurposed as temporary housing, every conference room converted into voting stations where Babylon 5 personnel made the most consequential decision of their lives, stay or go. Sisko stood in ops, surrounded by holographic displays showing real-time tallies. The numbers shifted constantly as crew members, civilians, families cast their votes through secured terminals. Earth Alliance personnel, 67% voting to stay in Federation space. Narn crews, 51% voting for dimensional transit to an unknown universe. Centauri, 73% voting for transit, apparently preferring exile over Federation oversight. Minbari, undecided, awaiting guidance from their religious caste. And the civilian population of the Babylon 5 fragment. Merchants, diplomats, refugees who'd sought sanctuary on a station dedicated to peace, they were split almost perfectly down the middle. We're going to have families separated, Kira observed, watching the data stream. People choosing different futures, possibly never seeing each other again. It's their choice to make, Sisko said, though the weight of it pressed on him. We can only provide options, not dictate outcomes. Dax looked up from the science station, her expression troubled. Benjamin, we've got a problem. The wormhole's decay rate is accelerating. I'm now estimating 48 hours until catastrophic collapse, maybe less. If we're going to attempt this dimensional transit, we need to do it within the next 24 hours. That doesn't give people enough time to decide, O'Brien protested. The universe, Odo said dryly, rarely accommodates our scheduling preferences. Sisko's combadge chirped. Sheridan to Sisko. Commander, we need to talk. In person. Something's happened. 5 minutes later, Sisko met Sheridan in one of DS9's auxiliary cargo bays. The Earth Alliance captain looked haggard, his uniform rumpled, his eyes carrying the exhaustion of a man who'd been awake for 48 hours straight. "What's wrong?" Sisko asked. Sheridan gestured to a secured container behind him. "We found this in the Babylon 5 fragments data archives. Buried deep, encrypted with shadow technology. My crew only discovered it because Talia sensed residue. Telepathic imprints left by whoever hid it." "What is it?" "Proof," Sheridan said heavily, "that the dimensional breach wasn't accidental. Someone on Babylon 5 deliberately sabotaged our universe's dimensional barriers. Someone working with the shadows, someone who wanted to bring this conflict to your reality." Sisko felt ice form in his chest. "Who?" "We don't know. The data is fragmented, corrupted. But whoever it was had access to the station's most secure systems. High-level clearance, intimate knowledge of both Vorlon and shadow technology. This wasn't opportunism, this was a carefully planned operation months in the making." "Why?" Sisko demanded. "Why would anyone deliberately breach dimensional barriers?" "Because," came a new voice, cold and familiar, "sometimes the only way to end a war is to take it somewhere else." They turned. Director Koval stood in the cargo bay entrance, flanked by 2 Section 31 operatives. She held a phaser, not aimed at anyone, just present, a reminder of her capacity for violence. "You," Sheridan said, his hand moving toward his PPG sidearm. "You're supposed to be in the Gamma 7 sector." "Cloaked ship," Koval replied. "Really, Captain, did you think Section 31 would simply withdraw because an admiral asked nicely? We've been monitoring this situation from the beginning. And we knew eventually someone would discover the truth." Sisko's hand went to his comm badge, but Koval shook her head. "I've activated a transport inhibitor. We're isolated from the rest of the station. No one's coming to rescue you, Commander. So I suggest you listen to what I have to say." "You sabotaged the dimensional barriers," Sisko said, understanding dawning. "Section 31 deliberately brought the Babylon 5 ships through. This entire crisis was manufactured." "Not manufactured," Koval corrected. "Redirected. Commander, do you know how the Shadow War ends in Captain Sheridan's universe? Billions dead. Entire species exterminated. Planets bombed into radioactive wastelands. And even after the war ends, the shadows don't die. They retreat beyond the rim, waiting for another opportunity to spread chaos. So you decided to bring them here?" Kira's voice came from behind Koval. The Major had somehow slipped into the cargo bay unnoticed, her phaser drawn and aimed. "Bring an existential threat to our universe because you couldn't figure out how to deal with the Dominion War." Koval didn't turn, didn't even flinch. "Major Kira. I wondered when you'd arrive. You're predictable. Always the one to flank, always the tactical thinker. And no, we didn't bring the shadows here to fight them ourselves. We brought them here because this universe has something theirs doesn't." "The Borg," Sheridan whispered, horror dawning on his face. Koval smiled. "Very good, Captain. Yes, the Borg. An assimilation-driven collective that seeks technological perfection through conquest. The shadows represent chaos, evolution through conflict, ancient organic technology. What happens when unstoppable force meets immovable object? They destroy each other," Sisko said, his voice flat. "You're planning to let the Borg and shadows fight, hoping both are eliminated in the process." "While we study the remains," Koval confirmed. "Imagine it, Commander, Borg nanoprobes attempting to assimilate shadow technology, shadow telepathy trying to corrupt the collective's hive mind. It would be the battle of the millennium, and the Federation would benefit regardless of outcome. If the Borg win, they'll have absorbed vulnerabilities from organic shadow tech that we can exploit. If the shadows win, they'll be weakened enough for us to contain or destroy. You're insane, Kira said. You can't control beings that old, that powerful. The shadows will. The shadows will do exactly what they've always done, Koval interrupted. Spread chaos. And we'll be ready. Section 31 has been preparing for this contingency for months. The weapons we supposedly discovered on Babylon 5. We built them before the dimensional breach, based on intelligence we'd already acquired from parallel universe studies. Parallel universe studies, Dax's voice came over a hidden communicator. Sisko realized she'd been listening the entire time, had kept channels open despite the transport inhibitor. Director Koval, are you saying Section 31 has been conducting interdimensional research? For decades, Koval said. How do you think we stayed ahead of threats like the Dominion? We study parallel timelines, identify dangers before they emerge in our reality, develop countermeasures preemptively. The Babylon 5 universe was simply one of many we'd been monitoring. Sisko felt fury rising, controlled and cold. You violated every principle the Federation stands for. You manipulated dimensional barriers, deliberately created a crisis that could destroy Bajorans, risked millions of lives, for what? A weapons development program? For survival, Koval said. The Federation faces extinction-level threats on multiple fronts. The Borg, the Dominion, potentially the Q Continuum if they ever decide to take us seriously. We need advantages, Commander. We need weapons, tactics, technologies that put us on equal footing with beings that can destroy entire civilizations. Even if it means becoming the monsters we're fighting? Sheridan asked. Especially then, Koval replied. Morality is a luxury for species that can afford it. The Federation can't. Not anymore. The cargo bay doors exploded inward. Not from phasers, not from explosives, from directed telepathic force so powerful it bent metal. Talia Winters strode through, her eyes glowing with light that wasn't entirely human, flanked by 3 Betazoid telepaths from DS9's civilian population. You're wrong, Talia said, her voice resonating with harmonics that suggested she wasn't speaking alone. Morality isn't a luxury. It's the foundation of civilization. Without it, you're just sophisticated animals fighting over territory. Koval's operatives raised their weapons, but froze, paralyzed by telepathic force. The director herself remained mobile, whether through psi-shielding or sheer willpower, Sisko couldn't tell. Ms. Winters, Koval said carefully, you're engaging in unauthorized telepathic coercion against Starfleet personnel. That's a criminal offense. I'm protecting innocent lives from a sociopath with clearance, Talia countered. Big difference. And I'm not alone. The air shimmered. Kosh materialized in the cargo bay, not its encounter suit, but something closer to its true form. Light and geometry, consciousness given almost physical presence, radiating power that made every human in the room feel small and temporary. The young one seeks to manipulate chaos. This is not wisdom. This is fear pretending to be strategy. Koval faced the Vorlon without flinching. Kosh. I should have anticipated you'd interfere. Let me guess, you're going to lecture me about the proper path for younger races, about how we should accept guidance from our betters. No. I will show you what happens when fear guides action. Kosh reached out, not physically, but conceptually, and suddenly Sisko saw. Visions flooded his consciousness, timelines where Section 31's plan succeeded, where Borg and Shadows destroyed each other, where the Federation claimed victory through treachery and became something unrecognizable. In those timelines, the Federation existed but had lost itself, had sacrificed every principle that made it worth preserving. And timelines where the plan failed, where the Shadows corrupted the Borg, where chaos-driven assimilation spread across the galaxy like a plague. Where species were absorbed not to achieve perfection but to spread discord, where the collective became an engine of entropy. Stop, Koval gasped, falling to her knees. Stop showing me. You demanded to see consequences. You wanted certainty. Now you have it. Your path leads to extinction. Not immediately. Not obviously. But inevitably. The vision ceased. Koval remained on the floor, breathing hard, her professional composure shattered. Sisko knelt beside her. Director, I understand your fears. I've made hard choices too, compromised principles when lives were at stake. But this? This crosses lines that can't be uncrossed. If we defeat the board by becoming like the shadows, we haven't won. We've just changed which monster destroys us. Koval looked up, and for the first time, Sisko saw genuine uncertainty in her eyes. Then what do we do, Commander? How do we survive when the universe is full of threats we can't match? We adapt, Sheridan said, stepping forward. We cooperate. We build alliances with species who share our values. And when necessary, we fight, but we fight as ourselves, not as poor imitations of our enemies. The vote, Dax's voice reminded them over the comm. Benjamin, we have results. 73% of Babylon 5 personnel have voted for dimensional transit. They want to leave, find a universe where their wars don't define them. Sisko stood, helping Koval to her feet. And the first ones? Have they agreed to guide the transit? On the cargo bay view screen, the wormhole appeared. Both the Vorlon and Shadow vessels had positioned themselves at its entrance, facing each other across the void. Kasha's voice resonated, the Shadows and Vorlons have reached an agreement. A rare occurrence. We will guide the younger races to a new beginning. But first, a price must be paid. What price? Sisko demanded. Understanding. The linear ones must acknowledge that neither order nor chaos alone sustains civilization. Balance is necessary. And those who remain in this universe must carry that lesson forward. The Shadow vessel spoke directly into their minds, we go. We leave this garden untouched. But remember, chaos sleeps, it does not die. One day, your Federation will face a choice, embrace conflict and grow, or maintain peace and stagnate. What you choose will determine whether you deserve the future you've been given. 48 hours until Wormhole collapse, O'Brien's voice cut through. If they're going, it has to be now. Sisko looked at Sheridan, saw in the captain's eyes the weight of leading his people into the unknown. This is it, John. Last chance to change your mind. Sheridan shook his head. We've been running from our past for too long. Maybe it's time to find a future where we're not defined by ancient grudges and impossible wars. Major Kira was right, exile is still exile. But it's also freedom. Then let's make it count, Sisko said. They rushed to Ops, where the evacuation was reaching its climax. Ships were forming up. Earth Alliance vessels, the Narn cruiser, the Centauri battleship, the Minbari war cruiser, dozens of smaller craft carrying refugees, civilians, people who'd voted with hope rather than fear. Kara's face appeared on the view screen. Commander Sisko, on behalf of the Narn regime, I thank you for your hospitality and your wisdom. In our universe, the younger races learn to stand together against the ancient powers. Perhaps in whatever universe we find, we'll remember that lesson. Londo followed, yes, very touching. Commander, if we survive this insane dimensional transit and establish a functioning civilization, I shall name a moon after you. Assuming we find moons worth naming. Farewell, and try not to let your Federation become too comfortable. Comfort breeds complacency, and complacency kills empires. Delen's image was serene, almost peaceful. We go not as refugees but as pioneers. Thank you, Commander, for showing us that there are still younger races worth believing in. The ships began moving toward the wormhole. The Vorlon and Shadow vessels positioned themselves at the entrance, creating a corridor of light and darkness intertwined, neither dominating, both necessary. Wormhole is opening, Dax reported. But Benjamin, it's not opening to the Gamma Quadrant. The dimensional coordinates are completely alien. I have no idea where this leads. Neither do they, Sisko said, watching the exodus. That's the point. One by one, the ships entered. Earth Alliance fighters in formation. The massive Narn cruiser, its scarred hull testament to decades of conflict. The Centauri vessel, still elegant despite damage. The Minbari war cruiser, graceful as a dancer. The Babylon 5 fragment itself, towed by the combined efforts of a dozen smaller ships. And finally, the first ones. The Vorlon ship entered first, its golden radiance fading as it crossed the threshold. The shadow vessel followed, phasing between realities one last time before disappearing into the unknown. The wormhole sealed. Ops erupted in controlled chaos, damage reports, status updates, relief that the crisis had passed without catastrophic collapse. But Sisko stood quietly, watching the space where impossible ships had been, where ancient beings had chosen exile over continued war, where people from another universe had voted to start over rather than remain trapped by history. Benjamin, Dax said softly, the prophets are communicating. They want to speak with the Sisko. He nodded, knowing this conversation was inevitable. In his quarters, alone, Sisko opened himself to the prophets' communication. They appeared to him not in the familiar celestial temple but as pure concept, disappointment mixed with approval, concern edged with hope. The Sisko sent the discord away. This is good. But the Sisko also learned from the discord. This is better. I learned that even ancient beings can change, Sisko said. That neither pure order nor pure chaos sustains life. That balance is necessary. The linear ones often forget this. They seek certainty, absolute answers. But existence is negotiation between extremes. The Sisko understands now. The Sisko will teach others. Will I? Sisko asked. Will the Federation learn from this, or will we go back to thinking our way is the only way? The prophet's response was enigmatic, both. Neither. The future remains unwritten. But the Sisko has planted seeds. What grows depends on those who follow. They withdrew, leaving Sisko alone with his thoughts. A chime at his door. Kira entered, carrying a bottle of spring wine and 2 glasses. Figured you could use this, she said, pouring. It's been that kind of week. Sisko accepted the glass gratefully. How are the evacuations proceeding? The civilians who chose to stay? Surprisingly well. Turns out when you give people options instead of orders, they tend to cooperate. Who knew? Her smile was tired but genuine. Commander, what you did, standing up to ancient beings, facing down Section 31, giving an entire parallel universe's worth of refugees a chance at a new beginning, that's going in the history books. If Section 31 doesn't classify it first, Sisko said dryly. Oh, they will, Kira agreed. But word gets out. It always does. And when it does, people will remember that sometimes the right choice isn't the easy one, or the safe one, or the one that guarantees victory. Sometimes the right choice is just, right. They drank in companionable silence, watching through the viewport as repair crews worked to stabilize the wormhole's remaining energy signatures. Somewhere in an unknown universe, ships from Babylon 5 were discovering new worlds, forging new alliances, building a future unburdened by ancient wars. And in this universe, the Federation had learned a lesson it wouldn't soon forget, that wisdom sometimes comes from the youngest species, that morality isn't weakness, and that standing on principle, even when every tactical consideration argues otherwise, is what separates civilization from sophisticated barbarism. The shadows were gone. The Vorlons departed. Section 31 would lick its wounds and scheme for another day. And Deep Space Nine would continue its mission, to stand at the intersection of cultures, to mediate between civilizations, to prove that cooperation was stronger than conquest. Not because it was easy. Because it was necessary. 3 months after the dimensional breach sealed, Commander Benjamin Sisko stood in the Celestial Temple, the Bajoran name for the Wormhole, and watched the prophets dance through non-linear time. They had summoned him, not for guidance or judgment, but for something simpler, acknowledgement. The Sisko brought balance. The discord departed. The temple remains. At a cost, Sisko replied, thinking of the families separated by dimensional barriers, the refugees who'd chosen exile over integration, the ancient beings who'd taken their war to another universe rather than resolve it. I'm not sure we solved anything. We just moved the problem. The linear ones always seek final solutions. But existence is continuous negotiation. The Sisko gave the discord ones a choice. Some chose to stay. Some chose to leave. Both outcomes serve the greater pattern. Sisko considered this. 73 Babylon 5 personnel had remained in Federation space, humans, a handful of Narn, even 2 Centauri who decided that Federation oversight was preferable to continued war. They were integrating slowly, bringing with them perspectives the Federation had never encountered. Humanity without Vulcan guidance, space exploration driven by necessity rather than curiosity, diplomacy forged in the crucible of survival rather than abundance. Starfleet had debriefed them extensively. Anthropologists studied their cultural development. Historians documented the divergence point between universes. Apparently, in the Babylon 5 reality, Vulcans had never survived their pre-Reformation wars, leaving humanity to reach the stars alone, unprepared, and vulnerable. The result was a species harder, more cynical, but also more resilient than their Federation counterparts. Earth Alliance had built an interstellar civilization without replicators, without transporters, without the technological miracles that made Federation life possible. They'd done it through determination, sacrifice, and the willingness to make compromises that Starfleet would consider unethical. Commander Sisko, came Admiral Ross's voice over his comm badge. When you have a moment, there's someone here who wants to speak with you. Sisko materialized back on DS9's transporter pad and found Ross waiting with an unexpected guest, Talia Winters. The telepath looked healthier than she had during the crisis, no longer exhausted by constant mental monitoring. Ms. Winters, Sisko said. I thought you'd chosen to remain on Earth, working with the Betazoid Institute. I did, Talia confirmed. And I will. But first, I wanted to thank you. In my universe, telepaths are tools, regulated, controlled, feared. Here, they're citizens. Equals. The Federation doesn't implant neural blocks or enforce mandatory service. You treat telepaths like people who happen to have abilities, not threats to be managed. That's what we strive for, Sisko said carefully. Though we're not perfect. There are species within the Federation who still struggle with telepathic integration. But you try, Talia said. That's the difference. And I wanted you to know, some of us who stayed, we're going to work to make sure your Federation doesn't lose that. Doesn't become so comfortable with its principles that it stops defending them. Ross cleared his throat. Which brings me to the other matter, Commander. Starfleet Command has completed its investigation into Section 31's actions. Director Koval has been relieved of command and is facing court-martial for unauthorized dimensional research, conspiracy to endanger Federation security, and a dozen other charges. Will she be convicted? Sisko asked. Unknown, Ross admitted. Section 31 operates in shadows for a reason. Their legal protections are extensive, their political connections deeper than we'd like to admit. But the investigation itself sends a message. The Federation won't tolerate operations that violate our core principles, even in the name of security. A message, Sisko repeated. But will it change anything? Ross's expression was grim. That depends on us, Commander. On whether we remember the lessons of the past 3 months, or let them fade into classified reports and comfortable denial. After they left, Sisko returned to Ops, where the normal rhythms of station life had resumed. Cargo transfers, diplomatic meetings, routine maintenance. The crisis had passed, leaving only memories and the quiet knowledge that the universe was larger, stranger, and more dangerous than they'd imagined. Dax looked up from her console, smiled. "Benjamin, sensors just detected something interesting. A message buoy, drifting at the edge of the system. It's broadcasting on pre-warp frequencies, analog radio, specifically." "From the Babylon 5 ships?" Kira asked. "Must be. They must have left it before transiting, programmed to activate after they'd gone." Dax worked her controls, and a familiar voice filled Ops. "Commander Sisko, this is Captain John Sheridan. If you're hearing this, it means we made it through. We're in a new universe. Young, mostly unexplored, full of possibilities. No Vorlons, no shadows, no ancient beings dictating how we should develop. Just us, and the choices we make. We've named our first colony New Babylon. Not original, I know, but it felt right. Carr and Londo are actually cooperating, miracles do happen, apparently. Delenn sends her regards. And all of us wanted you to know, what you did matters. You proved that younger races don't have to choose between Vorlon order and shadow chaos. We can forge our own path, make our own mistakes, achieve our own victories. Thank you for showing us that courage isn't about having all the answers, it's about asking the right questions." Sheridan out. The message ended. Ops was silent for a moment, each officer contemplating what they'd witnessed, what they'd survived, what they'd learned. "They made it," Kira said softly. "They actually made it." "Of course they did," Odo replied. "Humans are remarkably resilient, regardless of which universe they inhabit." Sisko smiled, feeling something loosen in his chest, tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. The Babylon 5 refugees hadn't just survived, they'd found hope. And in doing so, they'd reminded the Federation of something essential. That principles matter, that choices define us, that the measure of a civilization isn't its technology or territory, but its willingness to do the right thing even when easier options exist. Outside the viewport, the Bajoran wormhole pulsed with its characteristic blue-white radiance, stable, contained, protected. The prophets had restored it, sealing the dimensional breach, ensuring no further incursions from parallel realities. But the experience remained. The knowledge that infinite variations existed, that other humanities had walked different paths, that the Federation's way, for all its virtues, was not the only way to reach the stars. In his ready room that evening, Sisko recorded a personal log. 3 months ago, ships from another universe arrived in our space, bringing with them wars we didn't understand and philosophies we'd never encountered. Ancient beings fought over our worlds, treating our civilization as a prize to be claimed or a garden to be cultivated. We could have responded with weapons. We could have chosen sides, aligned ourselves with order or chaos, Vorlon guidance or shadow liberation. Instead, we offered a third option, self-determination. The freedom to choose one's own path, even when that path leads into the unknown. Most of the Babylon 5 refugees chose exile, a fresh start in a universe unburdened by their history. Some chose to stay, to integrate into our society, to share their experiences and perspectives. Both choices were valid. Both required courage. And both proved something I've always believed but sometimes struggle to remember. That the Federation's greatest strength isn't our technology, our territory, or our alliances. It's our commitment to the principle that all sentient beings deserve the right to determine their own futures. The shadows and Vorlons are gone, at least from our reality. But their questions remain. Does civilization require strict order, or does it need chaos to evolve? The answer, I think, is neither. Civilization requires balance. Structure enough to prevent collapse, flexibility enough to allow growth, and the wisdom to know when each is necessary. We gave the Babylon 5 refugees that balance. A choice, freely made, with consequences understood and accepted. In return, they gave us perspective. A reminder that our way isn't the only way, that humanity can thrive under vastly different circumstances, and that sometimes the most important thing we can offer isn't solutions, but options. The wormhole is stable. The prophets are satisfied. Deep Space Nine continues its mission. And somewhere in an unknown universe, humans who never knew Vulcan logic or Starfleet idealism are building a civilization that may one day rival our own. I hope they succeed. And I hope that if our universes ever intersect again, they'll remember that once, when they needed refuge, the Federation offered sanctuary without conditions and freedom without judgment. Because that's who we are. That's who we must always strive to be. Even when it's difficult. Even when it's dangerous. Especially then. End log. Sisko closed the recording, poured himself a ractigino, and looked out at the stars, infinite, mysterious, full of possibilities that even ancient beings couldn't fully comprehend. The shadows had taught him that chaos has value. The Vorlons had demonstrated that order has limits. And the refugees from Babylon 5 had proven that when given genuine choice, most beings choose hope over fear, cooperation over conflict, and the uncertain promise of a better future over the comfortable certainty of familiar struggles. Not because it was easy. Because it was right. And in the end, that was the only answer that mattered. Live long and prosper. Hit the subscribe button for more interesting stories.